here we are. Let's. All right, we are live on YouTube. And this is going to be an interesting one because apparently V Radio, who I'm reacting to several of his videos in this video, he's concurrently doing a live stream reacting to my live stream. So it's kind of an inception type thing, and we will see how that goes. So it's possible that after I react to his 3 videos, that I might just have to go back and rewind his live and then react to his reactions of my reactions, and then we'll really just go deeper into the whole inception silliness of it all. I was, supposedly he might also come into my chat as well and leave responses there as well, so I can respond more directly, and that might be more efficient if he feels that I've made a incorrect observation of his opinion or arguments thereof. However, I think that's probably going to be the case anyway, where we might disagree on the conclusions that are made, because we have plenty of disagreements when it comes to certain things. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes while I guess I'm letting this buffer. And there's Johnny Walker Dritt. Thank you for joining us in the chat. I'm wondering, are you going to be dual watching, Johnny? You going to be doing one and the other? JWD. I always want to say JYD, but that's my old wrestling enjoyment, I guess, that comes from that. But to give a introduction to the, what I would say is the oddness, I guess, of V Radio, because he says he voted for Bernie in 16 and 20. So he supported Bernie Sanders. He considers himself a I guess a leftist / progressive type on many of the issues. Clearly, as you might see when I reduce my image, the image on his YouTube channel is him holding both the heads of an elephant and a donkey. So he's the type of individual who is going to find disagreements with both sides of the aisle, and sometimes I find disagreements with both sides of the aisle, which is I try to be, I criticize my own when I can. Johnny Walker Dread, dual slang. Are you? But see, here's the thing. JWD, are you actually going to be doing a reaction while we're reacting? Or are you going to wait to react till after we're done? Because that's just inception levels of ridiculousness, I would say. But anyway, Neil, V Radio, or Neil Kiernan, VTV115 on Twitter. Or V Radio here on YouTube. You could search. I should put the link in the description of the video to his channel. I'll probably do that after the fact when I edit it. I'll edit it afterwards and give a link to his channel in this video description after the video's done processing. So there you go. Let's see. I'll wait till you get done, then you'll slay. Fine. And then there'll probably be another, because me and JWD have gone back and forth as well. Hey Jolie, how's it going? Me and JWD did go back and forth with some of the Rittenhouse arguments back then. I think there was at least once or twice where I corrected my position or changed my position based on something that JWD said. So I'm not the type of person who's just going to be hold firm to what I believe in if facts show that my beliefs are incorrect. So that's what I try and bring up. Anyway, so Neil, as I said, Bernie supporter, 16 and 20. Also believed that Kyle Rittenhouse was justified in his actions. And that was the initial place where we disagreed on the issues. He was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and some of what he said before, hello Kinky Streets, some of what he said in conversations about what he believes happened to the Occupy Wall Street movement is that he believes that the woke culture or the woke mob or whatever had helped to destroy the Occupy movement and helped to destroy Bernie Sanders' movement as well. And I'm not going to address those specifically now. If those points are made during these videos, I'll make some comments on that. I've seen bits and pieces of this video that I'm going to start off with. I've seen bits and pieces of I think I got into this video, I think, late, perhaps, the first video I'm going to be looking at, which is an author who was canceled for being, quote, like the NAACP. And I also, there's, I think, another video that I watched, I got in late to, and then I think another one I either didn't watch at all or, again, haven't watched a lot. So a lot of these, some of these arguments that I'm hearing from V Radio are going to be heard by me for the first time. So we'll have time to go over it, I guess. But first and foremost, remember, if you're watching this video and have not subscribed to my channel, please remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video. I'd also tell you to go to subscribe to V Radio's channel and like his video too, because likes help the metrics, so to speak. And if I'm going to be talking about him, you should hear what he has to say as well. So there you go. There you have it. I guess that's the intro. Again, if you want to support the podcast as well, you can go to patreon.com/liberaldan or patreon.liberaldan.com. Either way will get you there, and you can support the show, or you can go to the Buy Me a Coffee link to do a one-time contribution to the show as well. Or I haven't yet gotten up the images, but I should have the Venmo links as well if you want to support the show that way with one-time contributions as well. So, Lucifer the Doberman. Now that's okay. That's you. I don't sub to people that smell like cheese. I mean, I may very well smell like cheese, Lucifer, but I wouldn't smell like blue cheese, as maybe you suggested on Twitter. I'm not a fan of blue. Now, I might be a fan of, brie, feta. Those are excellent things. Got to do one thing housekeeping-wise first. Aaron West is now a moderator for the channel, so mazel tov. Thank you, Aaron and Jolie, for helping out, for being mods on my channel. Now, 5 minutes of V Radio, probably not with nothing to say so far in his channel. Sorry. I'll get to the point very soon. So, again, the first video is titled "Canceled for Being Like the NAACP" and Mercedes Lackey. And so we're going to listen to what V Radio has to say, and we'll pause and make commentary as we do. Let's see, Aaron, I do not enjoy blue cheese. I mean, blue cheese is just moldy cheese. Why would I want moldy cheese? It doesn't make any sense. Johnny Walker Dread. Those foreign cheeses, that's those foreign cheeses. American cheese is the best Kraft slices. I mean, Kraft slices have their place. I make a mean, basic grilled cheese sandwich with some Kraft slices, white bread, and some butter, and they're absolutely delicious. But, yeah, sometimes I like, other un-American cheeses or non-American cheeses. I guess un-American cheeses would be those cheeses that are against America. That'd be funny. Terrorist cheese. So here we go. Oh wait, he's muted. There we go. He was muted, so there we go. Let's unmute and go again.
So today, while I was perusing my Twitter, I stumbled on this crap. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America removed Mercedes Lackeys from the 2022 Nebula conference in accordance with our moderation policy. Please read the following statement from the SFWA Board of Directors for details. Let's have a look. The statement on removal of Mercedes Lackey from the Nebula conference. The following email was sent out to our SFWA members and our Nebula conference attendees this afternoon. Dear Nebula conference participants and SFWA members, we learned yesterday that while participating in the romancing sci-fi and fantasy panel, Mercedes Lackey used a racial slur. First, we apologize to our attendees and other panelists who were subjected to the slur. We've disabled access to the panel to avoid any additional harm being caused. Words can't harm you, folks.
And here's the initial thing that, V Radio says words can't harm you, but words can have a negative effect. I mean, if somebody referred to me as being somebody who's raised Jewish, if they referred to me in a manner of a slur, it could be deemed as, either threatening or making me feel unwelcome to some place. And there might very well be policies on places that may not want people to refer to people with slurs or with other types of names that they might not appreciate being used. So we'll continue with that, and we'll get to that in a second, because, I mean, the one word that was used, is the word that's in the NAACP, and so we'll talk about that later as well. But let's continue on with Neil's commentary.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Anyway, second, we are immediately removing Mercedes Lackey from the conference and the additional panels she was scheduled for In accordance with SFWA's moderation policy, the use of a racial slur violates the instruction to, quote, respect all cultures and communities. Do not make derogatory or offensive statements even as a joke. That applies to everyone in SFWA space at all levels of their career. Third, we will be discussing with the other panelists for, quote, romancing sci-fi and fantasy, how they would prefer we proceed when they are able to and comfortable in doing so. Like they have to recover from it, right? We will be offering to edit out the offensive portion of the panel or hold the panel again at a later date, inviting back the other 3 panelists and moderator to again take part. We will respect their wishes on how to handle this issue while also sharing the invaluable expertise they offered during the discussion. Thank you to our conference attendees and panelists who reported the use of the slur. We appreciate being alerted to it right away so that we can investigate and come to this decision as swiftly as possible. The SFWA Board of Directors, May 22nd, 2022. So what are they talking about, and what did Mercedes Lackey supposedly say? Well, it turns out that Mercedes Lackey was actually paying a compliment to a writer who happened to be a black man. More specifically, this black man, Samuel R. Delany. She was speaking in glowing terms of his work and its importance. Now, I haven't been able to independently verify this, but apparently, said black man is not siding with the SFWA on this and was not offended by what Mercedes Lackey said. That YouTuber's name is Cool Hand James. You can check them out.
And let me just make a comment here on that when a word is used and is disliked or is not approved of by a large group of people, it doesn't really matter that the individual whom the word was used to describe was offensive to that person or not. That person could not take offense, but other people could have a problem with it. And if it still violates the rules that as set forth by their policies, then that's kind of an irrelevancy. I guess, like, sure, maybe, that person can be listened to and you should listen to how they feel about it, but then you're also going to listen to other people and how they feel, how their panelists feel, etc. on the use of that word. So let's continue.
Put the link in the description. So apparently the person who complained about this, that started this witch hunt, was another person on the panel. Her name was Jen Brown. So, the romancing sci-fi fantasy panel wrap.
Let's pause for a second, because Lucifer the Doberman has a comment in the chat and says that it's not a slur. The word is not a slur. I don't know what racial background you're of, Lucifer the Doberman. However, and you don't have to tell me, you can if you want to, but it's fine, whatever. But it is not, like, for me, I might not see that word as being as similar as the N-word, and probably many people don't, but it's not my position to tell other people what is a slur or not. Like, if I feel that use of a word is a slur against Jewish people because I'm Jewish, it would be ridiculous for a non-Jewish person to be like, that's not an anti-Jewish slur. Well, no, you don't get to be the arbiters of what is a Jewish slur or not. Jewish people should listen to Jewish people to determine what Jewish people are comfortable with or not. And even if you say, well, this one friend of mine, he's Jewish and he didn't mind when I said such a thing, fine. If that's fine for that one friend, and if you feel like you're comfortable talking with your friend that way, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that others aren't going to feel the same way as your friend. They might disagree with your friend. They might disagree with your friend vehemently. I mean, there are comments that and the same word can be used in different contexts, and that same word could be used, positively by one person, negatively by the other. The way that you talk about something, the way you give your emphasis, the way you say the word, like even the word Jew in and of itself can be used as a slur or in a manner that's similar to a slur. Even if it's just like, oh, Dan, he's a Jew. Okay, fine, but Dan's a Jew? Now, yeah, that's bad. That would not be good. I would not take that well. So the way you say things, and of course, I'm sure there's going to be the mocking. It's not what you said; it's how you said it. But sometimes, the context in which the comment is given can very well determine whether or not what was said is offensive or not. Let's continue.
Instead of celebrating, I'm here holding grief.
Johnny Walker Dread says, is cracker a slur? No, I would not say that cracker is a slur. And now, does that mean that if let's say a black person went on a shooting rampage, killed a bunch of white people, and said, I'm killing y'all because y'all are crackers, does that mean that that person didn't commit a hate crime or whatever? No, that person obviously did commit a hate crime at that point, because he would be targeting a group of white people specifically for their race. And there have been examples where white people have been targeted. There's one case in Louisiana where a bunch of black prisoners attacked a white prisoner in a Louisiana prison, and specifically because he was a white person, and they attacked him for being white, and those people were charged and convicted with hate crimes. So again, the word Jew isn't in and of itself a slur either. But if you say it like Jew, like you dance a Jew or something like that, then yeah, it's going to have the kind of the same impact as a slur. So I don't know what you want. I don't know if you want to make a grammatical or syntactical difference, or not syntactical, the word semantic difference. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't know if you want to make a semantic difference between the something being a slur and something being presented in a slur type manner, but many times people overreact to the idea of, using kind of a shorthand to describe certain things, and like, oh, it's not really, well, if it's presented in a way that's similar, akin to how a slur would be given, then it's no morally different than a slur. Like, how I would probably say that if you're a white supremacist, or if you voted for a white supremacist, I don't see the moral difference between the two. Anyway, let's continue.
And frustration over what happens when language is misused, regardless of intent. During the panel, Samuel R. Delaney's trailblazing work was referenced. He was also referred to as colored. Hearing this, I had an out-of-body experience. I typed by colored, surely you mean black, into the chat, and then deleted it. Seconds later, I deleted several more. Let's backtrack and restate that messages, feeling shaky and out of it. When folks fuck up, it's important to call that out. Even when things are done in a spirit of warmth and kindness, Delaney's work was being praised, as it should be, but in that moment, the power dynamics left me speechless. So, Mercedes Lackey was giving the gentleman who happened to be black a compliment, which, that's who Mercedes Lackey is. They've been a woke author activist since the 80s, like before it was cool. But they used the word colored.
So she was a hipster woke person, as you will. I just need to chime in here, because just because you say something with the intent of being kind, it doesn't necessarily mean it can't cause harm. Like, somebody came up to me and was like, wow, Dan, you're really attractive for a fat guy. Like, okay, like a backhanded compliment. Okay, I mean, I appreciate that you consider that I'm good looking, but you're kind of hedging that there by saying, oh, for a fat guy. Yeah, okay then. So yeah, sometimes you can say things and you might think it's like when people refer to black people as well-spoken. Like, what's wrong with referring to a person as well-spoken? That I'm saying that they speak well. Well, the reason is because when people do that, it's done with the context of, we're surprised that this black person speaks so well, so we're going to call that person well. You don't see those same people telling white people that they're well-spoken. Again, well-spoken is not a slur, but it's a set of words that's used when describing black people that has a general racist overtone, even if your intent is to just say, this is a smart guy. Just say it's a smart guy. Even you can even find new words if you know that the terms well-spoken are words that are not received well. You might say he is a great orator or something like that. Somebody would probably be like, yeah, okay, good. This person is a skillful orator. And that would be a much better way of describing the person who's giving a good speech or whatever, who gives good speeches, without using the word well-spoken, which has a history. Anyway, let's continue.
just like civil rights activists did when they formed the NAACP, just like Martin Luther King did when he was like the head of a chapter of the NAACP, the word colored. Anyway.
Again, there was that word colored was used back in the day, and it was generally accepted to be used in that time period. And people, obviously the people that founded the NAACP, black folks and white folks combined, trying to seek advancements of black people, decided to use that term because that was the term that was used back then. But just because a term was used back then, it doesn't mean it's okay to use today. Or just because a term was used by certain people back then doesn't mean certain people should continue to be allowed to use it today. That's an appeal to tradition, which is a logical fallacy.
I was the only black panelist. I'm a new...
Johnny Walker Dread, why do they still use it in the name of their organization? I'm feeling that Neil's going to get to that point, and I'll address that point when we get there. And yes, Ross Wolf, because the only ever time I heard a black man called well-spoken was Biden talking about Obama. I was going to say, when Biden was speaking about Obama and saying that Obama was very well-spoken, everyone was like, freaking Joe, come on. You know better, or you should know better. But the idea that...
Newer author without many published...
I unpaused it mistakenly. The idea that if you haven't heard the... term well-spoken referred to by describing black people or seeing the negativity, then I would suggest that maybe you need to get out more, because well before Biden referred to Obama in that way in the 2008 election, well before that time, it was well known that saying, oh, that person is so well-spoken. If you watched the Chappelle Show episode, well, I don't know if Chappelle's canceled, but if you watch the old Chappelle Show episode, when it comes to when they had a white family who happened to have an unfortunate last name, and that white family was talking about their milkman who happened to be played by Dave Chappelle, and they were like overemphasizing, oh, and he's so well spoken, and there's the reason why they said that, because that's something that's been used for a long time to be a compliment, quotes, about black folks, when in really it's not a compliment, because in what they're saying is, oh, I was expecting you to be such and such, but you're so well spoken, so therefore you must be must be a good one, or whatever, again. So the use of the word, I mean, look up the use of the word well spoken when referring to persons who are minorities, and you'll find a lot of information that explains why referring to people as well spoken is not okay. And you should probably find other words. Be a better linguist. Be a cunning linguist, if you will.
Credits. I'm in my early 30s and was referred to as young during the panel. That's fine. I am young. Those aren't excuses, but they are illustrative of the power differentials at play. Now, though, I need to warn folks, please take care if you plan on watching our panel. Some wonderful wisdoms were shared, but you're going to encounter that moment, and the silence might be suffocating. And then somebody comes in and says, Jen, I'm so sorry. Like, again, she had an out-of-body experience. She started astrally projecting because somebody used the same word for people of color that, historically people have been using for that, just for colored people in general. That was...
Okay, here's, again, the idea that, there's not astral projection. It's the out-of-body experiences where like that moment where you're just kind of, you can't believe that you're there. You kind of feel yourself rising out of everybody, just looking at the entire thing from kind of like a point of view like you're not really there because it took you out of it, and you're kind of like dumbfounded. Like, that's what she meant by that. I don't think, again, I've heard people who have, have been witness to or have been victims of hate speech type things. And I've seen other people use a similar type, if not the same type of wording, to describe how they reacted when they heard such a thing. And I think perhaps it's just a matter of, maybe, Neil, you haven't heard people use that in other frames of references or other examples where people have described themselves being in a similar situation and describing their reaction as being the exact same. I have, so, I mean, if you have it, fine, but I'm saying I have, and therefore it's not an unreasonable description of what one's reaction might be. Don't be so literal.
The idea. It was just
I'm liberal, Dan. I'm not necessarily literal, Dan.
a reference to all people of color. I'm not saying that racists have never used that word, but some very not racist people used that word and still use that word. Let's go over that. But I want to make a quick note before we do. If there was some huge power differential, then how is it that you, an author that you've already admitted is not very accomplished, had the power somehow to get an author who's been writing woke-friendly fiction since the 80s removed from an entire convention, along with her husband, who had nothing to do with it? If there's a power differential here, I don't think it's moving in the direction that you believe it is.
I would have to ask Neil. If you were in the chat, I'd be like, so you're trying to say it's kind of a reverse racism type thing? But, I don't know. Let's see. Jamie Weatherland, cracker as an insult is a shortened version of whip cracker. These poor white people in the early 18th century America, they lived and worked in frontier regions, Georgia. Yeah, pretty much. See, Dave was making fun of how dumb people were saying about the word. So I know what Dave Chappelle was doing when he did that skit. The point is that that's another example of him using that white family, saying that somebody is so, I don't know, actually it was another white family that was referring to the family with the bad last name, and he was like, oh, they're so well spoken, to make the point of, these are the type of things that people say about black people. So again, let's continue.
So for those of you who aren't super familiar, let's take a moment and learn about the NAACP.
Inception, like video, YouTube and YouTube.
The NAACP. On February 12, 1909, what is now the nation's oldest and largest grassroots civil rights organization, was formed. The NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Wait, what? The National Association for the Advancement of
Colored People.
Oh my goodness, this must be an extremely, racist organization to use a word like that. And obviously all of the people involved must have been racist, because that's the big stupid argument that's being made here, is that supposedly the word colored was only used in reference to people of color by racists. Well,
That's not what the person said, that the word color has only ever been used by racists and has never been used by non-racists. That's not the point. The point is that the use of the word colored people, or the term, I guess, colored people, is one that has fallen out of disfavor in many contexts, even though it has still been accepted that they will use it in the name of the organization, probably because just rebranding the organization might be, something that they don't want to do, because they're so entrenched and they're so, that name is just so entrenched for over 100 years now that it's probably silly to change the name of the organization. And also, it kind of falls under the whole thing of, when people are marginalized, the marginalized people get to determine appropriate and inappropriate use of words as referring to them as a group. So, me and V Radio, we don't get to determine whether or not somebody's saying, this word can be used by these people but not by these people, because historically, the use by this people is bad and this people is good, or what have you. That's not our job to criticize them for doing. It's, if they feel like certain people should still be free to use it and other people can't, then that's their prerogative to do so. And you talk about the power structure, and you kind of mocked the power structure, or the power that exists, I guess, from the person who was saying the word at the conference, versus you believe that this individual had power to kick somebody out of the conference. Well, yeah, the fact that she was able to raise enough awareness about this individual's use of the word and how it violated the conference policies, and the conference decided to kick the person out, that doesn't mean that the person who raised the issue, it has more power than the other person, as a general speaking term. But I don't think at this point we're ready to be talking about intersectionality and other types of power structures and culture. However, go back to, I think the show was Give Me a Break, the one with Nell Carter, And that show, there was an episode where Nell Carter was was talking with the dad, who was an old white dude. And the old white dude was confused as to why it was okay for black people to refer to other people using the N-word, yet white people could not. And that's an argument that's still made to this day by many a white folk who are just mad that they want to be able to say that word, i.e. the N-word, not colored, but the N-word. And they're mad they can't say it, but black people can say it. And Nell Carter's explanation of it, which made perfect sense to me as a young child, was, and it stuck to me because I only ever saw that episode of thing once, but her explanation of it was that when we use it with each other, it's used in love. And when white people use it, when they refer to black people, it's generally used in hate. That's why it's okay for black people to say it and not okay for white people to say it. Now, there may be some black people who's like, I don't think anybody should say it, and that's fine. They're free to have that right. I'm not going to criticize them for having that right. I'm also not going to criticize a black person for saying it's okay for black people to say it, not other people to say it. Why? Because we're marginalized folks and we're using it in a different context with each other than a white person would be using it when they're referring to us. So there's that point. Let's see. If the word is bad, again, the word can be bad depending on the context. As I said earlier with the whole Jew thing, I'm Jewish. If somebody said, oh, Dan is a Jew, he's raised Jewish, Dan's a Jew, and there's no inflection or tone difference with it, fine. But ew, Dan's a Jew, then that use of that word then becomes negative, and yeah, you shouldn't say it like that. And your use of that word has now been done in a way to try and promote hatred towards me, specifically for the nature of my birth. Let's continue.
Hey, let's look further into this, man. Deep dive.
Has been a driving force in fighting race-based discrimination in the United States since its founding. In 1909, racial injustices were common. Segregation was legal in many parts of the United States.
Okay, V-Radio is in chat, so I'll come back in. How often do you call fellow Jews the K-word? I don't ever. But again, that's not the point. The point is, and that's why I think sometimes V-Radio you miss the point, is that it doesn't matter if I use it or not to refer to other Jewish people that way. But I do make some jokes. I will make jokes that are Jewish jokes that are based in the marginalization of Jewish people historically through society. If I make those jokes, it's coming from me reclaiming the power. That's why when you listen to Mel Brooks, why Mel Brooks makes fun of Nazis, why Mel Brooks turns things that are negative into humor. Why does he do that? Like, I was watching somebody else's reaction video to Blazing Saddles the other day, and then you had a Hitler guy dressed up as Hitler in the movie saying like, "Oh, I'm out of the movie once they get out of the bunker scene or whatever." Haha, funny. But a Jewish person making fun of Holocaust type stuff is a way that Jewish people reclaim that power and take that and make it so that they're dealing with the pain and using humor to heal. Whereas if somebody who wasn't Jewish told the same joke, it's very, very likely that person is not going to be taken in the same way. It's not going to be taken in a way that says, oh, he's just helping Jews reclaim the power. It's going to be like, oh, that was kind of awkward and odd for that person to doing it. Let's say, not all jokes might that be. Let's say a joke that I came up with that I probably wouldn't be mad at other people using would be like, why did the Jewish guy not want to go to the German baker? Because of the Holocaust. And people might laugh at that joke. And that's fine. And if I heard somebody who wasn't Jewish repeating that joke, I probably wouldn't think that they were being anti-Semitic. I probably would think they're just making a pun and a play on words, and a clever play on words at that if they were making it. And I would appreciate them repeating my jokes, I think, if they thought my joke was funny. However, it's possible that somebody else who's Jewish might not like that joke. They might not think it's a funny joke. They might think it's a harmful joke. And if that person says that joke isn't funny, it is not the place of somebody who is not Jewish to tell that person, well, Dan says it's funny. No, those other Jewish people who might disagree with the joke have every right to stand up and say, no, maybe you shouldn't be telling those types of jokes. So I'm not giving anybody permission to repeat that joke. I'm just saying that, maybe if I heard somebody tell that joke, that'd be fine. There are other jokes I've heard that I'm not going to repeat on my podcast or on the YouTube channel, that these other jokes that I heard when I was taking a class on how to witness and point out anti-Semitism, where they were telling these jokes and everybody kind of in the class that I was in, they told the joke and everyone's like, and I was like a little bit like, because I'm a terrible person sometimes, but those types of jokes that were being told should not be told by people who are not Jewish at all. I mean, because there's no way that it's going to be taken in a way that's not anti-Semitic. So again, a lot of people will refer to that as don't punch down, punch up comedy. But as I'm saying, it's just an example that I'm trying to use to explain why, the allowance of certain people to say certain words can only be done by the people who are marginalized by those words, and the people who are not marginalized by those words shouldn't get to then criticize the people for how they fight the marginalization. Now, it's brought up as whitey, like the word YT people, a slur, whatever, is cracker a slur. I mean, white people are not marginalized for being white, so therefore it's a little difficult to make that same comparison. And I'm sure there are going to be people who are going to say, oh, I'm punished for being white all the time, and they're probably wrong, and they're probably not, because they're probably, those are probably the same people who'd be like, well, I don't see my white privilege. Well, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But again, this is not necessarily a video about privilege, so I don't want to go off of that rail, so to speak, at least right now. Let's see, V Radio. I don't think the Jewish, was that a typo? I don't think the Jewish people, were you meaning to say, would name an organization the National Association for the Ascendants of K-word People. No, they probably won't. But again, I don't know if there was ever a time when the K-word was ever viewed as an acceptable word to refer to as Jewish people by Jews. Like, I'm sure Klansmen and other white supremacists would be like, oh, that, there you go, that, don't want to, I'm sure they've used the term frequently in a negative way. Again, the term colored people has been used in the past and did not have the previous negative connotation as it does now when it's used by certain people. And again, it's up to the people who are marginalized to determine whether or not certain words are acceptable or not. And I'm saying that as a whole. And so even if you find somebody who's like, I don't have a problem with you saying that, like I've heard sometimes refer to the group of people as people of color, as that's what some people prefer to people, especially when they like black, indigenous, and other people of color, like the BIPOC folks. Now, I have a friend of mine, or former friend of mine, who is a black gentleman and who doesn't like the term persons of color. So I would, when I'm around him, I would respect his wishes, and I would never use the term persons of color around him. So because I respect his wishes, but I also understand that that's, as movements grow and change and progress through history, the way people talk about things change as well. And that just because a term was used in the 1904s or whatever, it doesn't mean that that word is always going to be okay for all time, that you have a blank check to use it for all eternity. That's just not true. It's not a true statement.
Employment discrimination was common, and voting rights were often denied. People of color across the country had to live with the fear of racial violence and lynching. And so, the NAACP was formed, built on the ideals of another group, the Niagara Movement. W.E.B. Du Bois, along with 29 other prominent African Americans, started the Niagara Movement in 1905. They met near Niagara Falls and wrote a manifesto calling for equal civil rights, the end of racial discrimination, and the full recognition of humanity for people of color.
Who they called colored people at the time, which is literally why they named their organization that.
In 1909, many white liberals in New York City joined with some of the Niagara Movement's black intellectual leaders, and from that group, the NAACP was born. In addition to W.E.B. Du Bois, other NAACP founders included renowned civil rights leaders Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell. The NAACP's mission has been to achieve a fully integrated society with equal rights for all.
Uh-oh, the CRT advocates aren't gonna like that. since they prefer.
The CRT, again, I don't believe that Neil fully understands what CRT means. If we're going to go to a fourth video, I think there's a fourth video where there's a discussion of CRT and where he responds to somebody else's, I think, video. I was kind of perusing the videos I wanted to look at today. Many times when people are criticizing CRT, they don't understand what CRT really means, and I would challenge, I would debate Neil on that point as well. But if he goes into further detail after this point, then I'll deal with those points. But CRT doesn't mean that you're wanting to not be fully integrated with equal rights for all. I mean, people with CRT want equal rights for all. I think one of the people who might have criticized how we advanced, sometimes people with CRT have been negatively viewed the term color blindness when referring to, that people should be colorblind. They shouldn't see color. And that's how a lot of people would behave or operate when discussing, the ideal that we should get to the point where we don't see color. But we're not at that point where we can just say, let's not see color. By purposefully ignoring people's skin color, you're ignoring what people of certain skin colors have to deal with on a daily basis. So you have to be able to see skin color in order to understand that these people are dealing with issues that you're not dealing with because you don't share that inherent trait that you were born with, to no fault of your own. Some people are born one color, some people are in other colors. They shouldn't be punished for that. So the idea that one should be colorblind, the law should potentially be, treat people equally. And that's fully, people who are advocating for CRT are not saying that the law shouldn't treat people equally. CRT, which is taught in law school and not in elementary school, no elementary school is teaching CRT, is going to be getting into those ingrained details. But they've kind of, the right of which Neil is not part of, but still allies with on many issues, kind of use the CRT devil word, to kind of dirty the water on any attempt to teach children about, the history of this country. Well, let's continue with this video, and we'll maybe talk about that a little bit later if it comes up.
For segregation, but that's a different video.
Its national leadership has always been interracial, even though the greater membership...
Interracial. Now, the reason that that's important, because it was literally founded by white and black people, is that also is going to remove any kind of context to suggest that maybe this is one of those special words that only black people are allowed to use. Nope.
Has been mostly African American. To achieve its mission, the NAACP...
And again, context matters. And if I as a white person refer to the NAACP as a National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that's probably a generally acceptable use of the term. But if I say that person's a colored person, then that's going to be taken in a much different way. Because, again, there's the organization with the accepted name versus the use of the word speaking individually. And maybe you don't like that, and that's fine that you don't like the differentiation, but, again, it's not our jobs to tell persons who are black what they should feel about that term and when it should be used. It's like black people should get to write the style guide. Like there's like an APA style guide for terms describing people of different racial backgrounds. Each individual marginalized group should get to write the chapter on words describing that marginalized group as to how it can be used properly. That's the kind of the best way I guess I can explain that point.
Has not only focused on using the legal system to
Wait, Johnny Walker Dread, Lucid Denouement, CRT has nothing to do with history. CRT is not the history of this country. CRT, what's taught in CRT is in the history of this country helps form why we have CRT. But yes, when children are taught the history of the country, like racism and stuff like that has taken place in this country, conservatives have attacked it as CRT. So that's why I said what I said. Conservatives will attack that as CRT. So you're right in that teaching children the history, especially the history that refers to how there's been, racial oppression in this country, teaching them that is not CRT. But it has been labeled CRT by those who don't want to teach our history in schools, by people like Donald Trump, who want things like the 1776, whatever it's called, to counteract the 1619 project, because he wants to whitewash everything. I usually say sugarcoat everything, but in this case, he wants to whitewash everything and make sure that people don't see negatives about the country. He only wants people to look at the positives. He's always going to paint things as in a positive light. He doesn't want people to look at anything negative, because he's ultimately a salesman. Whether or not he's a successful salesman or not, he's a salesman, and he's always going to want to try and paint things in the most positive light. So therefore, if you dare teach people about the negatives that took place in our history, he's opposed to that. Let's continue.
Challenge discrimination, but also on convincing all people of the need for racial equality through speeches, organizing, and legal advocacy. Since its inception, the NAACP has had a long list of legal accomplishments and successes. The NAACP's first challenge was fighting Jim Crow laws, which maintain legal segregation. In 1915, the NAACP was instrumental in outlawing the Grandfather Clause, which allowed white people to get around literacy tests that were used to prevent people of color from voting in many states. From 1920 to 1938, the organization flew a flag outside its New York City offices with the words, "A man was lynched yesterday," to call attention to the rampant lynching occurring in the United States. In 1954, the NAACP's chief counsel, Thurgood Marshall, successfully argued the case of Brown v. Board of Education before the Supreme Court, ending the legal segregation of schools. During the Civil Rights Movement, the NAACP co-organized the March on Washington in 1963, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. The NAACP lobbied for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which made it illegal to deny people the right to vote based on their race. Today, the NAACP remains actively committed to fighting discrimination.
And here's the thing, and I don't know where Neil jumps back in at this point, but the individual, I didn't catch the name of the individual speaking in this video that Neil has clipped, but I would wonder if he would ask that individual how that individual feels, how she feels about the use of the word colored people outside of the name of the organization, i.e., was it fine for this, specifically, was it fine for this author to refer to the other author as a colored person? Why did the race even matter at that point? I mean, sometimes, people bring up race when it's not even relevant at that point. So again, I think you might find the answer to be like, yeah, I'm part of the NAACP, but that person should have used that word in that context.
Its scope has widened to include fighting inequality.
Lucifer the Doman, your Republicans don't want bad parts of history taught. I listen to a conservative radio show every day and frequently hear the host talk about how they don't want people to be taught to hate the country and don't want people to learn the negatives about the country. Donald Trump specifically made comments. I'll have to go find them, but maybe I'll do that on the show next Wednesday, or maybe I'll include that as part of the show next Wednesday if I remember. But no, it's not a straw man. Republicans clearly want to do that. I mean, not all Republicans. No, a bunch of Republicans though.
In economics, healthcare, education, voter empowerment, and the criminal justice system. To this day, the NAACP continues to serve as an important legal advocate for all civil rights issues.
So, that's the terrible racist organization that used the word colored in its name and still does today. So it's not even a situation of whether or not, maybe that's a word that used to be used that way, but now it means something else. It's still on their seal.
But it is a word that was used more generally in the past and is now, again, the people who are marginalized will tell you that, okay, it's fine to use it in terms of this organization, but referring to individuals as colored people is still not okay at this point, even though it was okay back then, because, again, you're appealing to tradition. Again, because marginalized people get to determine if the words that are used in describing them are harmful or not.
still on their website.
Well, Lucifer says, I doubt it. Sounds like you made it up in your own head. No, I don't think I'm that creative. I don't think I'm that creative enough to think that people would actually want to erase history. I can't make that up. That's when I heard it, I was like, really? I mean, why did Donald Trump make the 1776, or why did he support, if he didn't make it himself, the 1776 Foundation or whatever it's called? That was specifically done to contradict and to counteract the 1619 project that wants to teach people about the harm that has been done by racism in this country since its inception and prior to its inception.
This is just ridiculous. They can't even make the argument that supposedly that things have changed since 1909, because even in the 60s, Martin Luther King was a member and, I guess, the youth chair of an NAACP youth council.
Okay, so we can't make the argument that things haven't changed since 1909 because Dr. King said it in the 1960s. That's very similar to the argument that the Democrats are the racist party because the Democrats in the past were the ones who formed, like, the Klan was formed by some people who were Democrats, and there were racist Democrats who opposed, like, the Civil Rights Bill. And then when they try to convince you of that, I'm not saying that Neil believes this, but I'm saying when the conservatives will try and convince you of that, they go to 1964, 1965, and then they skip 40, 60 years of history. Or they and then don't and then ignore the whole Southern strategy by Nixon and Reagan that specifically went and targeted those former Democrats in the South who were disenchanted by how the Democratic Party picked up the mantle of civil rights, and then went and targeted those racists in the South who didn't like that, and then brought them into the party. It's why somebody like Ronald Reagan, was able to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and use the myth of states' rights in his campaign, because the myth of states' rights was used as a reasoning as to why states should allow slavery, or should be allowed to have slavery in their states, because states supposedly should have the right to enslave people. Of course, there's no such thing as states' rights. States don't have rights. States have powers. People have rights. The 10th Amendment clearly states that powers, not rights, that are not given to the federal government or restricted from the states are belong to the states. And powers are different than rights. Powers should not trump rights. Powers, people should have the right to not be enslaved. We should not have needed a 13th Amendment to ban most forms of slavery, because some forms of slavery are still legal through the prison system. But again, it's this whole idea that it didn't change since 1909, the early 1900s, because in 1960 it was still in use, ignores almost 60 years of history. So let's continue.
So it's like, this is just
Lucifer the Doberman. Slavery made up less than 5% of the economy. Almost every single, if not every single, article of secession that was written by each of the states that seceded from the Union listed that a white man should be able to own the black man as slaves, or some other version thereof, stating that the states should have the authority, power, right, what have you, to have slavery in their economy. And yeah, 5%, maybe 5% of the economy was not made up as, but still, how many black people were enslaved? A lot. And how many should have been enslaved? 0. So yeah, these states seceded specifically because they wanted to continue to enslave people, and that was not going to be allowed. So they left, and we brought them back, unfortunately.
Just ridiculous. People used the word. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not saying that some racist people didn't say it either, but there were also people who were speaking out on behalf of all people of color who also used the word. That's just the truth.
Before I get to this part, I don't know what this part is. Before I go on to this part, which feels like it's going to be a separate argument, maybe, I don't know. But a little story about, like, my mom and my grandparents. So my grandfather was talking in the other room when my mom was in high school. This would probably be, she was born in 54, so maybe like 1970, maybe 1971-ish. I don't know. Around there, maybe. 1972, maybe. When she was in high school, it'd probably be between 72 and 76. Because my mom was born in 54. And my mom hears my grandfather in the other room saying that we have to separate the whites from the colors. Telling that to my grandmother. And my mom, of course I hear this. I didn't witness it firsthand because obviously I wasn't alive. But my mom storms in the other room and is like, they don't want to be called colored people. They want to be called black people, not colored people. And my grandfather goes, I was talking about the laundry. So, it's a funny story, but it just goes. So when she was in high school, clearly there was a point after 1964, 1965, where after Dr. King was assassinated, when my mom got to be in her teen years, where the term colored people came out of favor. It was in disfavor for use when describing black folks. And the black people fought back against it, and so that's something that my mom knew in the 70s. So clearly in the 70s, that was something that was known. And again, in the 80s, and the 90s, and the 2000s, and the 2010s, and the 2020s now. For decades, it has been understood that that word being used, that description of black people, is not the favorable one, and trying to argue, well, it's in the NAACP, is just kind of ignoring that history. Lucifer, let's see, hold on. What's this? The prison system was made to replace the system of slavery. The police was what slave owners called the militia to hire and capture runaway slaves. Yes, that's correct. Policing as it exists today, I don't know if that's existed for thousands of years before the USA, Lucifer. But the plantation owners and everybody else, if you look at the history of what happened after slavery, is like they created laws like loitering laws, where somebody was loitering. So they didn't want black people hanging around certain places, so they came up with loitering laws. So then they could arrest a black person for just standing around. Oh, he was loitering. So that's against the law. So now we're going to lock him up for loitering, and we're going to put him in prison for breaking the law of loitering. And then what happens? Now he's in jail. So now that person's labor from the jail can be sold to the plantation owner, former plantation owners, so they can rent the black people from the jail system. And that still goes on today. That system still goes on today. And when you have a system that consistently marginalizes black people, makes it more likely that if you're a black person, you're more likely to be poor, because of many things, like, for example, the Tulsa, Oklahoma, race massacre that took place that destroyed the wealth of many a black family in Tulsa, Jim Crow laws, lynchings, redlining, many other examples in history that power structures, be they governmental or otherwise, have been used to keep black people from achieving any sort of success for themselves and for their families and for their future successes in preventing them from building wealth. They then become more likely to resort to crimes, especially when you manufacture crimes in such a way as to target black people to make them, because I'm sure there weren't many white people who were charged with loitering back in the day, but they charged black people with loitering back in the day. There you go. And there's disproportionate arrest records, sentencing, convictions, etc. Which we're going way off topic here, but I'm commenting to what's in the chat thread, with all the disproportionate ways in which black people are incarcerated in this country and are mistreated throughout the justice system and are given a non-equal shake in the justice system, comparing two people equally. Again, I asked this to Neil on Twitter the other day. I was like, if you had two people similarly situated, a black man and a white man, and who do you think would get the worst sentence when it came to a prison sentence? If both of them had an equal record, both of them were equal in every way, except for the fact that one was a black guy and one was the white guy, the black person on average is going to get a longer jail sentence than the white person. Simple as that. Yes, please listen to the mods. I can't catch every single example of of things. So please, if the mod calls you out for being disrespectful or somebody or crossing a line, I've given them the authority to mute as needed to keep the chat peaceful and calm and rational. So I would encourage you to please follow the examples of those, or follow the words of my new moderators, who I appreciate greatly for helping me make this a better channel. Anyway, let's continue with this video.
And whatnot, or he's been bad guy to people, and I'm like, hey, everybody sees that to him. I mean, I want to get to know the guy. He looks like a cool guy to hang out with.
This is what I'm asking. Dialogue. It's not so tough.
We're just having a private conversation.
What? 1491 describes the state of the New World prior to European conquest. My point is, he's telling me that I need to understand something about other populations.
No, that's not what I said. I said you need to stop demanding that everybody use logic and reason and white forms of knowledge to fucking prove yourself to the world.
So it's not necessary for people of color who find themselves offended to actually be coming from any form of rationality. If you've offended them, even in some weird ethereal way that makes them astrally project, I guess, then you are just as bad as a KKK member. They always...
Wow, that's just bizarre. Let's just rewind that again, just to see what was said. Let's just rewind that a smidge.
That everybody use logic and reason and white forms of knowledge.
Okay, so I guess the argument that's being made by V-Radio here is that logic and reason are white forms of knowledge, and that's not what this individual. That's not what I'm taking this individual as saying. Logic and reason and white's three separate things: logic and reason and white forms of knowledge. White forms of knowledge being, what we teach in schools that ignore many of the cultural things. Like, for example, I didn't know about the Tulsa race riots as a white person. I was never taught that in school. It took a long time. I was an adult when I heard about the Tulsa race massacre. I didn't learn it in school. In my elementary school and my middle school were very good when it came to teaching things. Like, we learned about Rosa Parks, we learned about Martin Luther King, we learned about segregation, and it was a Jewish day school. So they were, there's a strong history of connection between, Jewish people and black people in fighting for civil rights and for protecting each other when it comes to attacks against each other. For example, when Jewish scientists were trying to flee Nazi Germany and were not allowed to enter America early on when they were trying to escape, unless they had a job set up. The historical black colleges and universities, they hired on these fleeing Jewish scholars to be professors in their universities and colleges. Why? Because they wanted to help protect them. And yes, it also gave them good teachers, smart teachers, who were experts in their field. But you could have found other experts in their field, but they helped the Jews out because the Jews were the ones who were being murdered over in Nazi Germany. So there's a connection there between the two. So white form of knowledge is not something the person's not saying that, logic and reason, white form, he's not trying to say that they're all the same thing. It's just one thing. Now, using logic and reason, I have a feeling that, it's often said by individuals that I've seen this often. I guess I should say it's not often said. I've seen people try and claim from the right, try and argue that they're just using logic and reason or whatever in trying to debate that. And then I think it might be a little bit of stretch here. Maybe this person might have worded his argument inartfully because he's coming at it from sort of a passionate way. And there are many times when people come at things in passionate ways that they might inartfully and indelicately describe the things that they're talking about. So I'm not exactly completely sure the point that's being made about the logic and reason, but I've seen conservatives argue that, they're using logic and reason. So perhaps I'm going to posit this as a potential explanation for the first part of the conversation, the logic and reason statement, is that maybe he was trying to criticize that individual's claim that they were using logic and reason. I don't know, because sometimes I'll use people's words against them as a rhetorical point, but I don't have the entire clip here, so I can't really say whether or not that individual who he's talking with is trying to use that as a snarky bit or not. So I'll leave that part alone, but the whole idea that white's forms of knowledge, means anything than beyond, other than the fact that, how white people teach people and what white people tend to leave out when they're teaching people is a valid point that this individual brought up. Let's see. Hey Wes, how's it going? Yes, 21 people. Would love it to be 21,000 or 2,100 or even 210, but hey. To Aaron West, I didn't know about Tulsa until I was an adult student going to an HBCU doing a research paper. Let's see. If you look at the filter that was on the Smithsonian African American Museum, they identified logic and reason as whiteness. I'd have to go look that up. I don't have enough information on that part.
Who are you? To fucking prove yourself to the world.
So it's not necessary for people of color who find themselves offended to actually be coming from any form of rationality.
I'm seeing this part,
if you've offended them, even in some weird ethereal way that makes them astrally project, I guess, then you are just as bad as a KKK member. They always say that your intent is irrelevant.
Lucifer says that my statement was racist because I said what white people tend to leave out. What we have systems in this country that that are controlled by white power structures, and those white power structures fight certain things being taught, like about the Tulsa race riots. I have a TikTok about this, and I'm probably going to talk about this particular case also in next week's show on the podcast on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, either blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan or here on YouTube at 8 p.m. Central. There is a teacher an educator who was put in charge of a Mississippi school district. It was the first time a black person was ever put in charge of the school district, and to the point where the students were like, the only thing that shocked me about this whole thing was that they even picked a black person to begin with. So the black person sees these two schools in her district, and this one school was a mostly white school in the white neighborhood. The other school was a black school in the black neighborhood. The white school had all the gifted and talented classes, and there the black school had all the remedial classes in the black school. So the white school taught theater, the black school taught don't use drugs. The white school had amenities that were great and wonderful and air conditioning in the gym. The mostly black school did not have air conditioning in the gym for the 7 years prior. So what did this administrator do? She tried to deal with the inequities in the school system. She tried to make it so that you would have improvements done to the school that had most of the black students. And the white people got pissed off. Why? Because they didn't want improvements in the black. They only wanted the improvements to go to their school, to the white school. There was an attempt to put a pre-K4 class that would be covered by, that wouldn't have any tuition in it, and they were going to put it in the black school. And the white people were like, well, that's too far for us to drive. So what? So put it in your school then, and make it so that the other people can get to your school. And she was trying to deal with the inequities of the school, and they got to the point where a bunch of white people complained about her and got her separated from a school to the point where she's likely to be fired. And again, the only thing that surprised some of these students who went to the school that was made up of mostly black students was that she was hired in the first place. Not that she was fired, but that she was hired in the first place. And so, yeah, there are lots of places in this country that will fight any form of any attempt to try and help reach equity in this country, to deal with the inequities in this country. I've used a foot race example before, and I'll do it again. You have a foot race with two people who are otherwise equally skilled, equal body size, shape, muscle mass, etc. You're going to have them run a marathon, but the one person, let's say a white person running the marathon, has a straight shot from point A to point B, just 21 miles, whatever, straight in one direction, or whatever the length of a marathon is. No encumbrances. The black person running the same marathon has twists and turns and things they have to hurdle, and there's a 10-pound weight tied to their leg that they have to run with. And so you start running, and both start running, and both are trying to do the best they can. Of course, they have similar skills, but the white person's going way out ahead because there's no encumbrances that they're having to deal with. So then, maybe halfway down the race, they make an argument to the white person. They say, why don't you argue and make sure that this your black opponent gets to have all the encumbrances taken away? Okay. He agrees. The white person agrees. The right runner agrees. They say, okay, that's fine. Take out all of the hurdles in that person's race. Remove the weight from that person's leg. Great. Now we're equal, that person says. No, because you've already had the advantage of being able to run miles without those encumbrances. Meanwhile, this person is stuck way back here because of the shackles, literal shackles that were put on this person and the other encumbrances that were put in the way. So simply removing the laws doesn't create equity, because you then have to make up the difference. You have to bring the person up here to be able to make them equal, to be able to actually make them equal. West Webb, we are all most comfortable with the people to whom we relate. I don't think that's ultimately true. I was a white person, and I was the only white person in my neighborhood as I grew up. But my parents didn't make me look at the people who we lived at as people we shouldn't be comfortable around. Again, I'm not saying that my parents taught me to be colorblind, but my parents taught me to treat people equally and with respect. So, like when we had a big snowstorm, because it was Baltimore at the time, we had a big snowstorm that just blanketed the city, and our street was one of the last to get to, well, because it was a mostly black neighborhood. So what happened? I remember there was a big pile of snow, and all the kids were sitting on the top of the snow, and all the dads in the neighborhood were just shoveling the snow out of the street, and everyone was working together. Nobody looked at each other's, color as everybody being negative. Everybody kind of helped each other and, to try and get by. And that's great, but I'm still not, but the reason that we had to wait for the city to get around to shovel our neighborhood was because the neighborhood was mostly black. That's part of the inequities that take place in this country. Let's see, V-Radio, check your Twitter. I uploaded the flyer from the African American History Museum identifying logic and rational thinking as whiteness. Okay, we will look at that. We will bring that up. We will look and see. There you go. White culture in the United States. Or, let's bring it over here. We will look at it in the video. We will cover that video. There we go. Here it is. VTV115 on Twitter. This is in the Smithsonian Museum of African American History website. Aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. White dominant culture, or whiteness, refers to the ways white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized over time and are now considered standard practices in the United States. And since white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we have all internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. Rugged individualism. The individual is the primary unit. Self-reliance, independence, and autonomy, highly valued and rewarded. Individuals assumed to be in control of their own environment. You get what you deserve. Okay, so far I don't disagree with that being what America tries to teach, and or that being an aspect of people who are in power trying to say, oh yeah, you could pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do what you want to do. And somebody made that comment to me on TikTok the other day, where it's like people could achieve what they want to achieve. I'm like, again, if you have that race where the people are racing against each other and one person has encumbrances, the other person doesn't, the person who tries to win that race is going to have to deal with a lot more struggles. Family structure, the nuclear family, mother, father, 2.3 children is the, quote, ideal social unit. Husband is breadwinner, head of household. Well, that's more of, I would say that's more patriarchal than racial, but sure, I could probably see it also being, you think of the Beavers, but you could also think of the Huxtables if you want to ignore Bill Cosby and his terribleness. Wife is the homemaker, subordinate to the husband. Children should have their own rooms, be independent. And again, that's probably more of a class thing than a race thing. But okay, we'll go on. Emphasis on scientific method, objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationship, quantitative emphasis. Okay, and look, okay, that's a little weird. History based on Northern European immigrants' experience in the United States. Yes. Heavily focused on the British Empire. Yes. the primacy of Western, Greek, Roman, and Judeo-Christian tradition. Well, I disagree with that because there's no such thing as Judeo-Christian, because there's so much difference between Jews and Christians that the term Judeo-Christian is just silly. And we talked about that with Hal Sparks in the last episode of 2 episodes ago of Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, That's Right. And he had made a very good point about where Judeo-Christian came from and how, initially, stemmed from the idea of, oh, well, now these Jews are being treated bad, so therefore we have to pretend to care about them. Protestant work ethic. Hard work is key to success. Work before play. If you didn't meet your goals, you didn't work hard enough. Again, that's kind of a privileged statement. Religion, Christianity is the norm. Yeah, anything other than Judeo-Christian is foreign. Well, Jewish is also foreign, but sure. No tolerance or deviation from a single God concept. True. Status, power, authority, wealth equals worth. Your job is who you are. Respect your authority. Heavy value of ownership of goods, space, and property. Plan for future, delayed gratification. Progress is always best. Tomorrow will be better. Time, follow rigid schedules. Time viewed as a commodity. Okay, all those things are probably true. So let's go back to the whole thing of the emphasis on scientific method. This probably, again, it sounds really weird to say that aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. Again, we're going to reread the top. White dominant culture, whiteness refers to the ways that white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized over time and are now considered standard practice in the United States. Since white people hold most of the institutional power in America, we have all internalized some form of white culture. So then let's bring it back down to how it applies to this emphasis on scientific method, objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, quantitative emphasis. To me, it sounds weird. It sounds inartfully worded, I would say. But I would have to see kind of the underlying, there's this sheet, and then is there something behind this sheet that goes into more detail to explain what they mean by this, that, or the other? Because I have a set of videos on my channel, and I need to work on them more because I have more topics that I want to cover. But the term is the coming to terms with activism. And what I mean by that is that you literally deal with terms that are brought up in activism, and how sometimes people, like myself, will hear a term like toxic masculinity or privilege or whatever, and will initially be like, well, that's ridiculous. That sounds ridiculous. That's crazy. And so my initial gut reaction is sometimes not the best one. And so sometimes, when I hear something that I don't think it makes sense to me intuitively, I instead of just lashing out at it, I try and say, okay, let me think about it. Let me marinate on it. Let me try and understand what they're trying to say with that. Let me see if there's other information that is behind that in order for me to say, okay, this is what this person meant. It doesn't mean I have to eventually agree with the person what it said. It still could be full of crap. But, you kind of, my guidelines in those videos is you sit back and you just take the time to listen, and you think about what the people are trying to say when they're saying those things that you disagree with. So look, I would have to say I would want to see more on what caused this wording and more on their argument behind why the emphasis on scientific method is part of the aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture. Because maybe it's just white culture assumes that white people act like that and other people don't. I don't know. Again, I would need to see more about that. So I'm not going to make a firm, final comment on that point. I do appreciate you, Neil, for tagging me in that post on Twitter and showing me the graphics that you were talking about. It does cause me to want to look behind it and be able to say, okay, this is what they really meant by it. So maybe I'll go into that. Maybe I'll talk about that as well on Wednesday if I'm able to find more information on what caused this flyer to be created, and especially the portion on the emphasis of the scientific method. Because again, I agree. My intuitive self, when I see that, I'm like, that's very weirdly thinking, and but it might not be. They might not be trying to convey what they're trying to say. Like when I talked about terms and things the other day on the podcast, we were talking about the rent is theft folks. And while I don't agree with the term rent is theft, I don't think that all rent is theft. I do agree with the arguments being made by the racist, many of the arguments made by the racist folks. So therefore, I'm not going to spend time nitpicking over their use of the term of the slogan, because I'm more concerned with the arguments that are being made underneath. So I would want to look at the arguments made underneath with the emphasis on the scientific method as it contains the aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture, in order to see what they were really trying to say with those points, if that makes sense. Let's see. Oh, are we back to marijuana? That's what rolling weed is always the answer, Aaron. LOL. Or she said sage, but I don't know. Again, this is really confusing to me, because I'm seeing this arrow and this play button, and I'm like, is that what I'm talking about? Is that what we're talking about?
But in this instance, the word doesn't even mean what they say that it does. And it wasn't used in the way that they're claiming that it was. And it wasn't only used by people who happen to be racist, it was used by some of the most powerful forces in civil rights ever to be known in this country.
I'm not sure if those people would still, I don't know if Martin Luther King were alive today, if you asked him, should white people continue to refer to people as colored people? And I wonder what his answer might be.
But don't let a little thing like logic and reason get in your way. That's white forms of information. And as I mentioned earlier, they also banned her husband, apparently just for being married to her. He didn't say anything and had nothing to do with it. But don't forget, as I've been pointing out multiple times, all white people are accountable for anything that any white person has ever done. White people are a collective to be judged accordingly by the color of their skin.
No.
It's also important to note that Mercedes Lackey is in her 70s and would have been part of the generation that just openly used the word colored to refer to people of color, whether they were racist or not racist. Again, it was just in common parlance back then. You're talking about an old lady also, and this is really important. I'm going to mention this again, okay?
Okay. Let's scroll back for a second, and let's go back to the point made here, because now that my mouse is working again.
Or collective to be judged accordingly by the color of their skin.
No, white people are not a collective to be judged by the color of their skin, but just like the idea of white privilege, and white privilege is a statement about general things, it's not a statement about individual folks. But let's go deal with this comment.
It's also important to note that Mercedes Lackey is in her 70s and would have been part of the generation that just openly used the word colored to refer to people of color, whether they were racist or not racist.
Okay, and here's the thing, and I'm glad I brought this up because my mom was born in 1954. 4 years, 1 month, and 5 days after Mercedes Lackey was born. So generally, same-ish age. She probably graduated high school when my mom went into high school, whatever, or a year afterwards, but general same age. My mom doesn't refer to people who are black as colored people. She does it just because you were born in the 50s. It doesn't mean that it's acceptable to call people a certain name or refer to people a certain way in 2022. Things change. My grandparents, and I did make this point, and this is part of the video I did see, because I did make this point, I think either in his video or on Twitter, that my grandparents, who recently passed away in the past couple years, but they were in their late 90s when they passed away, 2018, 2019, that time of period, maybe 2017, 2019, I think those are the years they passed away. So, in their 90s, been around a long time. Now, my grandfather served in Germany, right after World War II. He didn't refer to black people as colored people. He may have back then, but he didn't now. Why? Because he understood that it's just things change, and the way you refer to people change. People aren't stuck. They're not beings who are incapable of learning or changing things. They're changing the way they look at life, changing the way they look. I used to support the idea of a national sales tax when I ran for Congress back in 2004. I don't still support that belief. Why? Because I've changed my mind. I've changed my mind on different topics of opinions. I changed my mind of how I word things. I think in high school, I might have made the argument as to if colored people is not okay, then why don't they change the name to the National Association of the Advancement of African American People? You know, I think I might have made that comment once in high school, but now I've changed. Why? Because I've listened to other people and I hear what they say and I adapt my life accordingly. And if you're a type of person who can't change your views, or are so set in your views and you can't change your mind, change how you do things, simply because you're old, that's a problem with the individual, because it's not an excuse. There's no excuse for, like, that type of argument would be the same argument as like, well, we used to refer to black people as the N-word when I was a child, so I don't see any reason I need to change now. No, it's stupid. It's a bad argument, and I would expect better of V-Radio. Let's see, check Twitter again. So I was trying to search for it, but there you go. Let's go back to Twitter and we'll see, because apparently there's another link. This is the context. Racial activists say that white people are collective on regular. Let's see. Is that the link? Did you give the link of the explanation of the photo of the image, or are you giving the link of the white people are not individuals thing? Okay, I linked the video explaining that white people are a collective. A CRT teaching professor speaks on it. Maybe we'll play that in a little bit. We'll see.
Again, it was just in common parlance back then. Yeah. You're talking about an old lady also.
Common parlance is change, and just because you're an old lady doesn't mean you can't change how you speak about people.
And this is really important. I'm going to mention this again, okay? She was writing, trend-setting fiction, including gay people, including the LGBTQ community, back in the 80s when nobody was getting, special recognition for engaging in wokeness. And she also did it the right way. You don't get any pushback when you just write original fiction that happens to include those characters. She did it and succeeded at it. The pushback comes when they want to do...
what's the wrong way? I'm wondering what the wrong way of her doing it would be.
Things like, suddenly Superman is gay, or, making black elves in LOTR, or black dwarves in LOTR, right?
There are drows, I think that's the proper word. There are dark elves or whatever, that historically speaking, I think making Superboy gay doesn't necessarily, doesn't mean that Superman is gay. I think that was the issue. I think people misunderstood that. I think they were trying to make Jonathan Kent gay, but let's continue.
Rather than just writing your own fiction where those characters are already black or gay. Like the successful woke writers, say, for example, Chris Claremont of X-Men, or Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek have done for generations. That's why there wasn't any pushback, and she became an extremely successful writer, and nobody complained about the inclusion of those characters because she was writing a different world, a new universe where those people were included from the beginning. So at that point,
But cultures can be toxic. Like when they add things to the Star Wars universe that weren't specifically in the Star Wars universe. For example, all these so-called fanboys or other folks who are just, why do they have to change Star Wars? Why do they have to? But there are people who complain about Star Trek. Star Trek is too woke. Star Trek has always been woke. I take some issue with the whole first interracial kiss thing, because it was basically aliens raping them, and then it wasn't like Kirk was like, yeah, Uhura's hot and I'm going to make out with her. No, Uhura and Kirk were forced to make out by these aliens. Kirk would make out with Romulans, Klingons, anybody else in the universe. He would make out with any of them, but not Uhura, not a black person, unless he was forced to by aliens. So I don't think it makes the points that it wanted it to make, but it was still a big point in the context of allowing an interracial kiss to happen on television. The whole argument that was made between the people who were black on one side and white on one side, and the other people who were white on this side and black on the other side, and that episode, that was pure wokeness. So, and people still complain today, oh, well, Star Trek Discovery is too woke. And I think the next video I'm looking at might be the Star Trek Discovery one. So we're going to continue. That might be the next video we look at. So, Let's see. Kimchi asked most of the people in the chat room, I don't lie, and if I make a mistake, I apologize. You should try adulting Lucy Liu. Okay, good. I mean, I appreciate when people make mistakes. I mean, I make a mistake, I apologize too. I try to always admit when I'm wrong. So
it doesn't feel forced, it's not contrived, and it's not being smeared all over your face. You write interesting characters who happen to be people of color or gay or whatever, and then you just normalize them that way. And that approach was working. This new approach is not. And it's not because of the fact that the characters are just there and then people suddenly hate them. It's that when you try to overpower your fiction with a message and, again, just dare anybody to dislike it, no matter how badly you wrote it, you're not going to get the reaction that you want. I'm planning on...
Okay, there was one episode of Star Trek Voyager that I had to stop watching because I felt like they were literally beating me over the head with the issue of healthcare system bad. Because this episode of Voyager was basically there was this hospital in space, and this hospital in space, the people living on the upper levels of the hospital got to use this drug for cosmetically, and the people on the lower section of the hospital needed that drug to treat a condition that was life-threatening. So the same drug had two purposes, but the rich people could use it and were using it cosmetically without issue, but the poor people on the lower edges of that space hospital weren't able to. And I had to turn it off because even though I generally agreed with the message that such healthcare systems are bad, it was just like beating me over the head with it. But to me, that's the exception and not the rule when it comes to these sort of things. Like, there are some people who say, why are they trying to shove this in my face in sci-fi or fiction or fantasy or whatever, when they're just adding a character or maybe making something about a character that maybe perhaps wasn't brought up or wasn't considered a part of that character at the beginning, and maybe they're just adding something new that's just makes the character a little bit added to, but doesn't necessarily change the entirety of the character. I don't know. It's just, I think people just complain. People like to complain too much.
I'm making a different video about that topic later. But again, the lady was in her 70s.
Wait, Jolie, you liked that episode? Okay, I mean, fine. That's fair enough. I mean, I liked most of the Voyager episodes. I like most of the Star Trek I've seen. I couldn't watch the end of it because I was tired. Maybe I was just tired watching it. I don't know. But I was like, I guess the problem was it was the fact that I knew how the episode was going to end. And so I didn't bother watching it because I knew that they were going to violate the Prime Directive. I knew that they were going to make sure that the poor people got the access to the drugs, and they were going to, make this point or whatever. So it was almost like it was just too predictable, and that's why I was like, enough.
Is in her 70s, and likely used that term because everybody used it. Again, including Martin Luther King, including the NAACP. Everybody used the word colored. But
they stopped.
Another subtle irony, it's also interesting just how quick they can turn on you, because literally 2 days ago they had given her a Lifetime Achievement Award. Look here at the comments, people are already saying it's not too late to take the award back and give it to someone else. To, of course, somebody with a pride flag and all that has to point up at it with their finger like, yeah, do that. So this person with a pride flag, in their bio is so quick to turn on somebody who's been, again, retweeting LGBTQ friendly stuff, and trans stuff this entire time, like for years at this point. We can turn on them that quickly. We can turn on them, on a dime, basically, just because they, chose one word, that is still used by civil rights activists to this day. Again, don't demand anybody that use logic and reason, though. That's whiteness.
But again, I'll have to keep making this point. The fact that the NAACP uses it is not justification to allow other people to use it.
So to wrap all of this up, again, I've just got to ask, who do they think they're helping with this stuff? Like, who exactly is coming out better because of this? Is there anybody who's just going to change their mind about any of this because of this kind of insanity? That's really what the problem is. That's why it reminds people of a religious inquisition. That wasn't exactly effective either. The religious inquisitions did a fantastic job of making religion look ridiculous, just like the Crusades. And I think that years later, that's exactly how this kind of stuff is going to be viewed.
But the religious inquisitions were the people in power discriminating against people who didn't have power. Whereas this situation is people who do not have power, who lack privilege, are fighting against the power structures and trying to make sure that the people who are marginalized are not further marginalized. I think there's a big difference there that you missed.
Viewed, and what its role was in the reputation for the civil rights and, I even shudder to call it the civil rights movement, the social justice warrior movement. It's not good for them. It's not going to look good for them in history, provided we get to any semblance of rationale. I'm concerned a lot about the just the degradation of the ability for people to think and share information and to think critically. I'm concerned about the implications that it will have on society's future, which is exactly what got me to start doing this show again. And it's the reason I don't really concentrate too much on right versus left politics. I concentrate on stupid versus not stupid politics, thinking versus not thinking, because society itself will unravel if we can't do, that. That's, how are we ever going to come to any kind of reasonable, conclusions about anything that we do to govern ourselves if we can't even talk about basic facts? And if we're going to outlaw the use of logic and reason as racism, would you want to live in a society with these people?
And again, my jury is still out as to whether or not that was what they were really trying to say, or if it was just inartfully said or whatever. I still need to see the underlying argument made by the Smithsonian, his Museum on African American History, to see what they really meant by that, to see what was meant by that. And so we'll try and look for that, I guess, maybe between clips where I'm not having to talk or whatever. But we'll see. But let's continue.
Mercedes Lackey has been one of them for many years, and did so in a way that was risking her career, because again, she did this before it was cool, and they turned on her instantly, in a way that's not even rational. I know I must be, a white supremacist because I suggested that it must be rational. Oh my. So anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. Now I've been pointing to the subscribe, ring the bell, to be an share. Effort to just simply and if you can support me financially, you can go to my website, check that out, v-radio.us. Separate. There you can find all of my social media stuff and be notified. And if you want to support me, you can do so on Patreon or PayPal.
Okay, there you go. So that's the first video. We're gonna try and look for that thing. Otherwise, let's see. This is only a 7 minute and 40-second video about the race dividers or whatever, race baiters. Let's see. We can bring up his video. It's not the video of or the default video of the individual saying that white people are not individuals. It's the radio's video describing I guess this. So we'll see if it's given in content. Let's go ahead. We'll throw this in the mix. We'll watch this one and we'll see what it says.
So for a while now, I've been pointing to the fact that there seems to be an effort to just simply invert what racial activists believe to be the hierarchy. They want separate sets of rules for themselves and to essentially establish black privilege. I've also commented on the fact that science shows that the act of doing this actually causes more bigotry and racism.
Let's play this part again. This is the part that was made to me, I think, on TikTok.
Separate sets of rules for themselves and to essentially invert what racial activists believe to be the hierarchy. They want separate sets of rules for themselves and to essentially establish black privilege. I've also commented on the fact that science shows that the act of doing this actually causes more bigotry and racism.
I would have to see, I guess, that video as to whether or not this really causes more bigotry and racism. The idea that, you know, having these certain sets of rules is somehow causing more racism. Like, I think racism causes more racism. I don't think actions done by marginalized folks cause more racism, but I will just have to disagree on that point, I guess, at this point.
I've discussed this kind of rise of rhetoric along the lines of white people are collectively this or collectively that. That white people are responsible for this or responsible for that. I went over that quite a bit in my series about everything's going to be all white. And I'm still going to do more of that. I actually have plenty to do with it. I just hadn't finished it. It can only take so much of watching that kind of content. But I stumbled on this on Twitter, and I decided I wanted to address it because it's somebody saying the quiet part out loud. I wanted to address that. This college professor was caught on video saying exactly what it is that this particular video is what I am attempting to address. And that is this need to suggest that white people are a collective monolith and therefore equally, collectively guilty for any and everything that they have deemed that white people are guilty of. Let's take a look.
Do serious justice works, and it's a strategy. It's a strategy to pretend that like all white people are.
It's a strategy to pretend that all white people are individuals. So white people are not actually individuals, but it's a strategy to pretend that all white people are individuals. That's really what has been something they've just been slowly trying to socially engineer into society for quite some time, which is why you see all this anti-white rhetoric. The purpose of it is in the same way that the Nazis, picked the Jews out and demonized them and made them...
Come on. The criticism of I guess white culture, white privilege or whatever, and I don't know, this is a TikTok that we're looking at, and I don't know how old this TikTok was, but it was likely either 30 seconds or a minute, so therefore I don't know if we have the entire context of what he was trying to say, but trying to say the poor plight of white people is anywhere akin to what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust. Stop it. Let's continue.
Them collectively on the hook for everything bad about Germany. People of color have been manipulated into doing the same thing, only to white people. If we want to say maybe perhaps
people of color have been manipulated into doing things. So what are you trying to say? That, I mean, I could easily twist that word around too and say, you're saying that black people are not capable, or people of color are not capable of figuring out for themselves, and they've been tricked into believing that white people are this way. So are you saying that they're not smart enough to understand what's going on with their lives and be critical of white power structures? I mean,
perhaps that this was taken out of context. Unfortunately, this video does not have very good quality because it was caught on a phone in a situation where I don't even know if this guy necessarily knew he was being recorded. But I did get more of his tweets that confirmed that, yes.
I mean, it's not what you said, but it could be twisted that way. That's what I said. It could be what you said could easily be twisted into that's what you said. I'm not saying that's what you said. I'm saying it could be twisted into what you said.
This is exactly what he means. White people are not individuals. Let's take a look. The whites. Don't group us. We are individuals. Irami, that's the name of this guy. Well, but you individually make yourselves into the same variety of whites. And that's not great for black communities. These are individuals, too. But that's irrelevant if your goal is to avoid getting stung. So, in other words, no. White.
There's a similar video, I guess. That might be inartfully said. I think Muhammad Ali made kind of a better argument about this. And his argument was his distrust of white people in general. And so he goes... let's see, there's a door in front of me, and coming down this hallway towards the door is a bunch of rattlesnakes. And you tell me, okay, some of those rattlesnakes are not gonna bite you. Some of those rattlesnakes are okay. But are you gonna then convince me that I'm gonna not shut the door because some of those rattlesnakes might not bite me and might not cause me to die? Or am I going to shut the door and stop the rattlesnakes from coming into the same room as me because I don't want to risk getting bit and getting poisoned or I guess poisoned. I guess poison's not the right word. Venomed be the right word. Punished. Let's see. No snakes. I actually got bit. Why did Indiana Jones? Why did it have to be snakes? But anyway, I think that could very well be the point he's making here. That if you want it, not all bees are going to sting you, but you're still going to be wary of bees because some might sting you. It's kind of the whole, not all men argument that's made. Why do men have to do this? And women will complain. Why do men have to be like this? And then some men will get aggravated. Oh, well, not all men do that. A bunch of men do it though. That's the point, is that sometimes people who, this is the whole thing about fragility. White fragility, male fragility. I deal with the whole fragility thing in one of those. I do deal with fragility in one of those coming to terms with activism videos. Because again, just if it doesn't apply to you, then don't get upset about it. Let's continue.
White people are not individuals. That's a strategy to suggest that we should be judged individually. And I replied, the KKK groups black people as criminals due to FBI crime statistics showing a clear pattern. Is that wrong? I would say it's wrong, because grouping all people of a race and suggesting that race is a determinant of human traits is, well, racism.
Now I will interject. Because I've not seen this video, and I was about to say, Neil's probably using a dictionary definition of racism, and that's what a lot of people who are trying to argue about racism will do, is use a dictionary definition of racism that doesn't include that one, in order to be racist, in how people in social justice circles talk about racism, that racism requires power. And look, I used to be one of those people who would be like, well, this dictionary definition says this. Yes, I could find a dictionary definition for a word to suit my purposes, fine, and that's fine. And I used to do this, but I've stopped. Why? Because I realized that it doesn't do any good if I'm trying to have a discussion about racism using my definition, but I'm trying to have a debate with the people who are bringing up racism, and they're using a different yet valid definition of racism. That doesn't do any good for the conversation, because we're fighting over two different words with two different meanings. I mean, they're similarly meaninged. They have similar meanings. They're close. But when people who are talking in social justice circles about racism, there is an inherent, to be racist, there has to be power behind it. But yes, you could find dictionary definitions that define words differently as well, and they could be valid in certain conversations, but that's not the conversation that they're having. It is what's the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for a word, and my words fail me today. So it's disingenuous to try and tell somebody that they're being wrong about racism when you're not using the definition of racism that they're using. There are plenty of sources with definitions of racism that do include racism requires bigotry plus power. And if you don't have the power, then then it's not going to qualify as racism as they're discussing it. So it's disingenuous to try and then change the subject to then your preferred definition of racism.
Definition of racism. Meaning the actual one, not the one that they're attempting to lie into.
Wes Webb says plain semantics. Yes, I could deal with semantics. Words have meaning. Yes, words do have meaning. But and also Neil's being semantic as well, because he's trying to use this meaning. I'm just saying that if you're going to have a conversation with somebody about what they're saying is racism, you have to talk about it in their realm. You can't then talk about, well, you're wrong because I'm using this definition that is also valid, but it's not what they're talking about.
Being by repeating the lie over and over again, but different video. I've already covered that topic.
V-Radio says, no, you don't get to simply invent new definitions anytime you feel like. I'm not saying you get to, although all words are made up, so that's fine. But again, they're for a very long time. My mother, I'll bring up my mother again. My mother has known for a while when she's discussed racism too. It's not an old topic. It's not a very new idea that when talking about social justice, that the racism being discussed requires the people promoting it to have power. Hell, when discussing like institutional racism, like the racism that affects people as a whole, you could even be somebody in a marginalized community and still promote the institutionalized racism. Like if a police departments enforce institutionalized racism against black folks, you can be a black police officer and still perpetuate those power structures against members of your own community. So let's continue. I rewound it. Darn it.
Racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. The idea that you can just...
Again, this is a definition talking about superiority. It's not a definition talking about power structures and systemic marginalization and oppression of people. That's why it's disingenuous to use this definition against people who are talking about systemic and institutionalized power structures and the systemic and institutionalized marginalization of certain classes of people.
Put together, a suggestion that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits. In other words...
Wait, Wes is saying Dan is trying to bring us back to racism. It's part of Neil's video. Neil literally has the definition of racism here. Neil was talking about it. I'm just responding to Neil. I'm not the one bringing it up. Jesus.
White people do this, white people do that, is racist.
And when people say like white people do this, white people do that, it's like white people use unseasoned food is something that people will say many times on TikTok, whatever. Now I can go and I could show my spice cabinet. I can go through my spice cabinet and say, hey, here's all of my spices that I have, and there are a lot of them because I like well-seasoned food, and I am 100% honky. I'm 100% cracker. I mean, my joke is I put on my Twitter feed, I have a picture on my Twitter feed that I took a DNA test and found out I'm 0% that bitch, because literally I am completely Caucasian. Just like all European, nothing else but Europe. It's ridiculous how white I am. But even my wife, who likes less seasoned food than I do, less spicy food than I do, she even has some bits and pieces from other countries. I mean, I lost 1% Jewishness, and it was 1% added that was Sardinia. That's the closest I think I get, is Sardinia. I'm 1% Northern Mediterranean. That's crazy.
Racism, in the same way that black people do this and black people do that, is racism. Further along into the same argument, each has individually made themselves into a recognizable group. This is
great, my internet's
still talking about white people. I'm from California, and it's kind of like the way a good...
What is going on with my internet? My internet stinks today. I hate Cox Communication. I don't know what is going on with this darn video. Let us see.
Good number of people,
Oh.
through their individual efforts, have the same nose as Nicole.
Gabriel Archange. Now, mods, don't take exception to this yet. I just want to say, Liberal Dan, you are a coward. Please inform me as to why I am a coward, and I will address that while we're continuing to talk about Neil's video.
Kidman. And I said, when people individually make themselves into a recognizable group. So racists would say that's a thing. Like when the KKK says that you are not human because statistics show a recognizable group. This is wrong because it's racist to draw such parallels. And
Wait, Gabriel Archange. Is it Archange? No L? Is that because you took the L? Because you're getting ready to. You hide your house off beside the label Liberal Dan, but you use a Marxist redefinition of racism. I mean, I don't know why that makes me a coward. I don't know. Okay, I mean, I told Jolie, I told y'all to be, wait a second before removing his stuff. But a Marxist definition of whatever. No, it's not a Marxist definition of racism. It's just one of the many valid definitions of racism. But I don't know why that makes me a coward, per se. I don't know why that makes me an individual who has cowardice. I'm just, I use you want to know why I use the word liberal, Dan? A conservative, John Osterland, he's in local New Orleans radio, or at least he's eventually will be back on local New Orleans radio. John Osterland nicknamed me Liberal Dan, and when I was, I would call in and I'd be like, "Hey, it's Dan from New Orleans, or Dan from wherever city I was in at the time. It's Dan from this, Dan to this, Dan to that." Dan from here, Dan from there, and John would be like, "Oh, look what it is, it's Liberal Dan," and he'd make it all whatever. And then people would find out somehow randomly, like I'd be talking with people and somebody else would be like, he's Liberal Dan, and the people would be like, "Oh my God, you're Liberal Dan? I can't believe I just got to meet Liberal Dan." I'm like, "I'm not a celebrity. What are you talking about?" And it got there was so many times where people were so excited to that they met Liberal Dan that I was like, all right, I'm going to make the blog, I'm going to make the podcast, we're going to do this thing. We're going to brand myself as Liberal Dan. In reality, I'm like on Twitter, I refer to myself as a pragmatic progressive. That's how I refer to myself as. I don't necessarily consider myself a Marxist. I guess I would think that Gabriel Archangel would probably say that. Would you say that Biden is also a Marxist or socialist, Gabriel? I would like to have that question. Now, Neil wants me to replay. So let's rewind a smidge, because Neil wants me to react to something that was said. So we're going to rewind. And we're going to replay a few seconds of it so we can get what Neil was saying, because I was so distracted by the fact that I'm supposedly a coward because I'm supposedly a Marxist. Yeah, and again, also many times people who are conservatives don't understand what Marxism is, what socialism is, or what have you. I have somebody, again, I played it on my show a while back with this guy Cash Money from Ohio. He said that something wasn't socialism because he believed socialism was such and such. And I'm like, no, that's authoritarianism. You're really literally defending wanting socialism while punishing other people, claiming that they are socialists. There are people who call Joe Biden a socialist. Joe Biden is not a socialist. But I understand that if you are so far to the left, this is my left, that's your left. So if you're so far to the left, according to you, that you look at people who are centrists and liberals and progressives and leftists and socialists and Marxists, the difference between all those bunches are so tiny because you're so far to the left. So V-rated liberals nowadays are corporate Democrats like Biden, like Clinton and Biden. I mean, and if you compare, and sometimes there are people who are leftists who I get into arguments with, and I got into, like last week, I got into an argument with a bunch of people who were, very leftist Bernie supporters who don't want to support the Democratic Party because, whatever, for reasons, because they don't understand how not supporting the Democratic Party helps the Republican Party. Oh, they're the same. No, they're not. They're not the same. One party is clearly interfering with putting into common sense gun laws. One party is clearly wanting to restrict abortion rights while the other one is trying to defend them. So there are clear differences between the two parties. But, Gabriel, rewind the video. Marxist. I did rewind the video, and I'm waiting to play it, but I'm just trying to address my point.
Racists would say that's a thing. Like when the individually make efforts have the same... I'm from California, and it's kind of like the way a good number of people, through their individual efforts, have the same nose as Nicole Kidman. And I said, when people individually make themselves into a recognizable group. So racists would say that's a thing. Like when the KKK says that you are not human because statistics show a recognizable group. This is wrong because it's racist to draw such parallels.
Okay, but I think what the KKK is saying and what this person is saying is not even saying that all white people have noses like Nicole Kidman. He's just saying that in California, there's a good number of people who are trying to force themselves to look the same way because they all want the same nose or something like that. I don't think I think he's using that to make the larger point, but I don't think that's the point you think he was making.
And I quote the crime statistics that show an overwhelming propensity for violent crime from one specific racial demographic. It would be racist to suggest that this is inherent behavior or something that all black people are collectively, responsible for, because they're not. That would be racist.
But there's a difference between saying white people put raisins in potato salad and white people are unseasoned Americans, and saying that all black people are criminals. There's a big difference there, and especially in the harm that it does. Saying that white people, for example, are unseasoned and use unseasoned food is not going to harm white people in any way. It's not going to perpetuate some harmful stereotype that's going to make white people have a disadvantage in society. But perpetuating the idea that all black people are criminals does, and that's why there's a big difference between what the Klansmen do and what generalizing white people on certain silly things does. Now, I'm not saying that this Irami Osei Frimpong, this professor, says, he might say other things too that potentially are more serious than just white people are unseasoned, but I'm sure we'll get to that in a second.
So why is it acceptable to suggest that all white people collectively are responsible for something? It's not. It's still racism. Here's some more lovely quotes from this professor. I've been telling you for a while that unless you deal with the white family and the white church, your politics is going to get run over. Again, the suggestion that race is the fundamental determinant.
Okay, but at this point, he hasn't played this video that's sitting right here. So we're hearing a statement about the white family and the white church. Your politics is going to. What is he saying there? Is he saying that you have to deal with the white family, white church, as deal with them, i.e., or you have to deal with them, i.e., you have to make deals with them. You have to go along with the white family and white church in order for your politics to get some sort of support. Maybe he's trying to say that it's bad that people have to kowtow to generalized white beliefs. Most of that are image, which we'll get to in a second. But again, I don't know if he plays this video or not. I'm assuming that maybe he does, but I don't know. But since I so far haven't seen, this video has 2 minutes left, and this video that he's in this tweet has 20 minutes on it. I'm assuming that we're not hearing that whole thing, so we're not hearing the context of the video. We're just seeing the explanation of the video. And as I've said before in this broadcast and other broadcasts as well, if you are going to just take somebody with what the small thing says and not ignore the overall context of what the small thing really means, then you're not being genuine in discussing what's being discussed. Now, I might disagree with what this individual has to say from the funkyacademic.com, but what I'm saying is that I don't think that this one sentence, this tweet, which is limited in scope and what can actually be said, is a fully accurate explanation of what he's trying to say, as like the rent is theft folks is using rent is theft is not a full explanation of what the people arguing rent is theft really mean. All right, come on. My mouse is being really stupid today. Come on.
Of human traits is racism. Folks underestimate the tax that comes with dealing with a room full of white women about schools. And make no mistake, they are like mosquitoes. 3 or 4 in a room of 20 is already a room full of them. Or maybe it's more like a skunk, where all you need is one in order to conform the whole room into being terrified it's going to spray. So again, just openly...
I'm guessing that Neo's going to have a problem with the idea of so-called white feminism. Because of the fact that, there are... and that's the thing, is like when you have a group of feminists together, and you have some people who are white women, and a lot of times what marginalized folks will say when they're talking about so-called white feminism is that the white feminists will sometimes talk over everybody else because they feel like they should be heard over everybody else, and they want their voices heard. They want and they speak over a lot of people, and it's their. That doesn't mean that all white people who are feminists do that. There are plenty of white people who are feminists who don't make it about themselves, who will hand over the mic, if you will, to explain what Bernie did in one of his rallies when people took the stage and whatever. And there are people who will hand the people the mic and say, look, this you should have the opportunity to say what you want to say. My explanation and my feelings shouldn't dominate the conversation. And that's, in my opinion, what's being stated here is that when you have white women advocating about school issues, that sometimes they will ignore their privilege that they have and use their power to dominate the conversation and try and quiet folks who are marginalized and keep them quiet. So, and if you said this on Facebook, you'd probably it might get banned because of the fact that you're there's a little bit of dehumanization there, and I don't know if I agree with with that use. Like, I don't know if I would agree with saying maybe it's more like a skunk where all you need is one in order to confirm the whole room is being terrified it's going to spray. But the idea there is simply that when you have somebody who's using their power, using their privilege to try and silence others, that other people might be gun shy and trying to talk about what they want to talk about for fear of being shut down or shouted down or not being listened to. So
talk with hate.
Yeah, he literally said white women, not white feminists, but I was using the white feminists as an example. I was using white feminism as an example to kind of describe what he's doing here with what people will talk about in feminist spaces about how white feminism can sometimes blanket out or drown out the voice of other marginalized women who are trying to also have, discussions about how power structures harm them, not just as women, but as other people, and how white people will form power structures within feminist movements that still continue to marginalize people and silence their voices when they shouldn't be silenced, when sometimes they're harmed even more because of intersectionality. And I'm sure I just made a lot of people in the chat's heads just explode because a lot of people aren't ready for discussions of intersectionality yet. But
about white people. Because this man believes that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits.
Now, Lucifer de Doberman says just replace white with black and see if it should be shunned. Look, I'm shunning the idea of the dehumanizing part of it. I don't necessarily agree with that tactic of it, especially with the skunk. But what I'm saying is that if you had a black person in a room, you're unlikely to have that black person be silencing out all the white people in the room. There may be exceptions that you might be able to point to, but the exception doesn't prove the rule.
He's a racist.
The exception does prove the rule.
The funny thing is, this man is paid to be a professor to teach people this nonsense. And he is now teaching students that white people are not individuals, that they are a collective monolith responsible for anything and everything done by anybody else with a similar color of skin. And at the same time, he's telling his students that black people are not subject to the same scrutiny.
And I would have to watch more of his videos to see if that was actually what he was doing. So,
black people can commit any number of things, and they are not collectively black people. I agree with the second part. I don't agree with the first part. The rules that govern what is and is not racism and bigotry do not just magically change. Despite any attempts at them trying to claim that the definition requires power on the part of the person who holds the belief, it's still just a belief. Period. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in.
All right. And of course, V Radio's explaining, listening to him. Thanks for listening, all that good stuff. I'm sure you can go to Twitter. I've given you his Twitter handle a bunch. I'm going to link to his videos in the video. Look, here, Little Dan watching. Should we turn on his reaction to my reaction for a quick second and see what he's saying and how he's saying? Do the inception thing now instead of later? Oh, we started 2 hours ago. Jesus. All that good stuff. Sure, you can go to Twitter. I've given you his Twitter handle a bunch. I'm going to link to Let's see. Let's go over the chat and see what the people in the chat say. Liberal Dan has said a bunch of billion stereotypes. Is Dan low IQ? I mean, I'm low IQ, but at least I can think for myself. Lifted and Gifted is in our chat too. LOL, hilarious. Let's scroll back through some of the comments because I mean, V Radio has been here. Parallax, wow, good job, Dan. You're white. I think you're a grifter. You have to say things you don't believe for money. I mean, I don't get paid too much for doing this, so whatever. Bernuski, Cox Communications is utter shit. It's cable internet for people who don't have Spectrum AT&T in their area. That is absolutely correct. I agree with Bernuski 100%. I agree with you. It is for people who don't have Spectrum or AT&T in their area. I am 2 weeks away from getting AT&T in my area. I'm excited. Cox is about to get yeeted. I am so happy about that. So look, I agree with you, Bernuski, on that. Let's see. Let's see. Yes, you are talking. Biden doesn't remember the whatever. I highly doubt Liberal Dan knows much about socialism and Marxism himself. Okay. Jesus Christ, sorry, I sent him waffling. He didn't send me waffling. I just was amused at the idea that I'm somehow a coward because I'm supposedly a Marxist. Eric, let me guess, Dan wouldn't get on a stream and just have a conversation with you. I absolutely would have a conversation with V Radio, and if we wanted to set it up, I'm happy to. He's welcome to call in. I think he did. I think you have called in once. to the show. I think you did. I had other people call in. I think I had the friend, the guy who lost the friend in the Oregon things, who was on charges, whatever. He called into my podcast. I'm more than welcome to, more than welcome people on my show. I'd definitely come on his. So yeah, V Radio acknowledges that. Let's see. Reacception, nice. Blah, blah, blah. Let's go down. Let's see, now we're probably... Parallax says, hi, Dan. What's up? Nothing much. Darian, hi, Dan, you're a coward. Well, more people on the coward train. Cool. But just remember, come over to my video and like my video too, because I'm right now, let's see. Like. See? There you go. Evidence that I'm liking V Radio's video to help him out. And I encourage everybody else to like his video and do the same thing. Help V Radio out. Give him some thumbs up. Go over to his video, give him some thumbs ups as well. And I'd ask y'all to do the same thing for me. Counter subscribe, help each other grow. That it is what it is. I don't have my Trump it is what it is button on me. Loose for the Doberman. Dan, you smell like cheese. Cheese. So old Dan has no problem with a racist professor teaching. Again, depend. I need to know more about what this individual says to know whether or not he's a quack or not. Let's bring this over here real quick. We're going to bring this over into this page real quick from the Miami Herald. A Smithsonian Museum has apologized for a chart listing hard work and rational thought as traits of white culture. The National Museum of African American History and Culture said in a statement Friday that it was wrong to include the graphic on an online portal about race and racism in America. It is important for us as a country to talk about race. We thank those who shared concerns about our Talking About Race online portal. We need these types of frank and respectful interchanges as we as a country grapple with how we talk about race and its impact on our lives. We erred in including the chart. We have removed it, and we apologize. The educational resource released by Washington, D.C. Museum was intended to serve as a guideline for discussing race. It includes a section about whiteness. The chart included a section titled Aspects and Assumptions of Whiteness in the United States, including culture traits, which included hard work as the key to success, objective and rational linear thinking. Again, I had problems with the wording, but I was willing to give, a look into why they said it or what they meant by it. Apparently they're apologizing for it, so there you go. I guess they're just admitting that it was either inartfully said or what have you. So chart, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I've just scrolled too far because my mouse again is being stupid. White dominant culture, whiteness refers to the way white people and their traditions, attitudes, whatever, blah, blah, as I read before. According to the chart, those aspects include self-reliance, a nuclear family, breadwinner, wife is homemaker, no tolerance for deviation from a single God concept, bland aesthetic and aesthetics. The museum says it's reviewing policies to ensure quality of digital materials. Education is core to our mission. We thank you for helping us to be better. The museum apology comes at a time where people across the United States are calling for better racial relations in the wake of the death of George Floyd, a black man who died in police custody. What is the link? Again, we're being slow again, because, again, Cox Communication stinks. Is this the statement that they put out? Oh, this was just the Twitter statement, I guess. The same thing that we probably just looked at. Maybe. We aired and reviewed, let's see. We aired and reviewed the chart, we removed it, and we apologize, we're reviewing our policies, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so, look. So V Radio, and other people were critical of them using that chart, and I wanted to see what they said about it, but clearly they even agreed that they were wrong for including it, so there you go. They were wrong for saying what they said, and they admitted to it, and they apologized, and they retracted it, which is what everybody should do when they're wrong. Nobody's perfect, and they were clearly in the wrong, and they apologized for being in the wrong, so I'm not gonna sit here and say, yes, they're wrong, they made a bad decision, there you go. Let's go to the next video I wanted to go to, because we're already 2 hours into this, but we're going to keep going. We're going to trudge through because I wanted to get to at least 3, even though we're now going to be at 4 if we hit all of them. Star Trek manga and CRT, what's the connection? So let's hit this one up now. This is the second one I wanted to hit on.
So, Star Trek Discovery.
Before, let's see. Go back to my chat and read from my chat. V Radio, what the student in the video clip you were playing earlier was quoting, that teach the nonsense in colleges. I mean, I had a nonsense teacher in college too, who was ridiculous and I think overly. You complain about woke culture. You've complained about the woke mob. I have referred to some people as being overly woke, and which has to the chagrin of some of my other friends. And the people who are overly woke, I've described as, there was a comedian who way back in the day who talked about his dad or his uncle or something, and he would find a racial issue in everything, like, why are the green olives in the jar but the black olives are in the can? And everyone laughed at that. But there are people who are like that. That's not racism, clearly. But they like to make something. Like there was the example back in the day of the rodeo clown who wore an Obama mask. And people were trying to say, that's racist, he's wearing an Obama mask. No, the same rodeo clown wore a presidential mask for every president from, as he worked. So when Clinton was president, he wore a Clinton mask. When Bush was president, he wore a Bush mask, etc. So no, it's not racist in and of itself to wear an Obama mask. So another example of, I guess, people being, as I said, overly woke. So I do agree that people can go too far with the wokeness. But I'm still waiting to be convinced on why or how woke culture or the woke mob or whatever destroyed Occupy or whatever. I think there's been some points made about it, but I'm still not convinced. We'll see. I don't know if there's a clear video on that. You can tag me on Twitter if you want. I don't know if we're going to get to that today. I was hoping to not go over 3 hours, and I think we will, but whatever. It is what it is.
So, Star Trek Discovery, MAGA, meaning Trump supporters, and critical race theory. What's the connection? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. So, back when Star Trek Discovery first came out, it was pretty obvious that the majority of the people who were making it were really motivated by woke, left-leaning politics.
I would just jump in and say, Star Trek, since its inception, has been dominated by woke, left-leaning politics. Star Trek is space socialism.
And they just openly admitted that apparently their version of the Klingons are secretly Trumpsters. As in, their version of the Klingons were meant to represent white nationalists, in their view of what white nationalism is. The co-executive producer of the new series Star Trek Discovery has told Rolling...
If you don't say it in this video, V-Radio, and you are going to say that, I would ask that you say this at, you said their version of what they think white nationalism is. And it's like, so if they feel that white nationalism is X, do you believe that their definition of white nationalism is wrong? And as such, what do you think a correct definition of white nationalism is? That's what I would like to know. Johnny, JWD, Star Trek is a kid show. There is a Star Trek, what's it called? It's on Paramount Plus. There's a cartoon. That's probably a kid show. But Star Trek is not a kid show. Come on. Just because it's sci-fi doesn't make it a kid show. Yes, let's stop. About the whole, like Aaron says, let's not stop calling people liars. And here's the thing. My thing about calling people liars is this. Too often the word liar is overused. If somebody states something that's not true, that doesn't make them a liar. If somebody states something that's not true, but they believe it to be true, that's not lying. That's just being incorrect. You have to know that something is incorrect and still say it in order for it to be a lie. So let's just make sure we follow that one. White nationalism is people who want this nation to be a white nation. That's white nationalism. People who are xenophobic and bigoted and racist. Those are white nationalists. I.e., not... Again, making a distinction, I guess, between the white feminism, which has a specific meaning in the context in which it's given. White nationalism are people who want a white nation, not just white people who are nationalists. It's a difference.
Rolling Stone that President Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign was, quote, front and center in our minds as they developed it.
Why is that?
So much so that the rallying cry of the show's villains is specifically patterned after the Trumpster credo, Make America Great Again. We felt like it would be interesting to really look at what's going on in the United States, Aaron Harberts told Rolling Stone, noting that the series' primary villains, an extremist Klingon sect, scream, Remain Klingon. Something deliberately reminiscent of Make America.
And look, okay, the series villains and extremist Klingon sect, so not all Klingons, but a sect of the Klingons, a portion of Klingons, scream remain Klingon.
Great again. As Harberts put it, it's a call to isolationism. It's about racial purity, and it's about wanting to take care of yourself. And if anybody is reaching a hand out to help you, it's about smacking it away. That was pretty provocative for us, and it wasn't necessarily something that we wanted to completely lean into, but it was happening. We were hearing the stories. Discovery star Jason Isaacs added, "We're living in monstrous times. Let's not dance around it. Hideous, divisive times, when all sorts of stuff we thought was long buried is coming to the surface, and being encouraged by the most powerful people on the planet. We're living in disgusting times." He continued, "I don't think science fiction can solve any of these things, but we are holding up an optimistic view of what the world could be, a better vision of ourselves." So let's take a look at what specifically the Klingons in question were saying.
Let's look.
So to give you guys a little backdrop, if you don't know anything about Star Trek or Discovery in particular, the show opens up with a speech being made by essentially a spiritual leader of the Klingons. And one of the things that he begins it with is saying, "Together under one creed, remain Klingon." Now, what the concern of this spiritual leader was that he was concerned the Federation, which is basically the main protagonist of any Star Trek story, which is a group of, it's just a melting pot of different races from different worlds coming together, to live under one banner, kind of like the United States.
Supposedly.
They were concerned that the Federation was seeking to destroy their culture through assimilation and integration. If the Klingon Empire were to join the Federation, then their concern would be essentially that their racial and cultural identity would be eliminated.
Sounds like a white
nationalist. In another scene, he explains it to an assembly of all of the Klingon leadership. "Our purity is a threat to them. They wish to drag us into the muck where humans, Vulcans, Tellarites, and filthy Andorians mix." In other words, his problem with it is that he doesn't want to be part of a society that's a melting pot. He wants his race to stay distinctly Klingon.
Sounds very similar to the whole, great replacement theory things that people were spouting, that the Buffalo shooter was talking about, that Tucker Carlson was talking about, that a lot of people who are conservatives, I'm not saying most, but a lot of people who are conservative are concerned about the great replacement theory, i.e. like the same people from Charlottesville who are marching down the streets of Charlottesville saying the Jews will not replace us because according to them, the Jews are the people who are wanting to bring in all of these other folks, i.e. black people, Latino people, other immigrants, in order to make them the more dominant culture and wash out and drown out the white voices, so to speak. That's the whole idea behind the whole great replacement theory, that these white people don't want to be silenced or marginalized or put in the minority. Why? Because they know how they treat people in a minority, and therefore they don't want to have the people treat them the same way. So therefore they don't want to be drowned out. They want whiteness to reign supreme, i.e. they want to maintain and uphold white supremacy in this country. Therefore they want to they're not going to want to have people, immigrate into the country. They don't want people. And there are conservatives who are fine with immigration. I'm not talking about those conservatives. But there are other people, especially people who are supportive of Donald Trump, who are people who do support these ideas and who do spout things about the great white replacement or the replacement theory or whatever it's called. And they are people who are trying to use scare tactics to make white people think that they're somehow a dying breed and that somehow all of this immigration is going to drown out the voices of all the white people, so we need to stop it. And some of those people will then continue to make the argument that Jews are to blame for it. So white nationalism, white supremacy is a support of white supremacy and is also anti-Semitic to boot.
And I guess the comparison they think they're drawing is to suggest that somehow MAGA was about white nationalism and making America white again.
It is. It was. Clearly. some people who voted for Donald Trump may not have felt that way. There are also people who voted for Donald Trump who didn't think that Donald Trump was going to make it so that Roe versus Wade would be overturned, and we're very close to that happening because of the leaked Alito draft that we saw. There are people who voted for Donald Trump who believed that he was a true populist and that he somehow believed and would be supportive of the people. There are people who were workers in like steel mill who heard him saying that he would bring back the steel industry in this country, and the steel workers were like, yes, we will support you because you're going to support us. And then they supported the steel industry, but he only supported the steel owners and not the workers, and labor was like, what happened? You were conned by the ultimate con man of Donald Trump. But Donald Trump ran on an argument, and here's where people, I really should turn on V Radio's chat to see what happens right now when they respond to this. Because Donald Trump ran on a policy. He ran on this idea that he wanted a total and complete ban of Muslims entering this country. He literally said that. He wanted a total and complete ban of Muslims entering this country. And if you're in V Radio's chat saying you don't agree with it, because I'm not looking at the chat right now, come to my chat and tell me I'm full of crap. I dare you, because I'll bring up the video and I'll show you that I'm right. Because that's what he ran on. He ran on a total and complete ban of Muslims entering this country until we figure out what's going on, which sounds indefinitely, because who knows when you'll figure out what's going on. But that's isolationism. That's preventing Muslims. That would technically even include American Muslim citizens from returning to the country if they left the country. That's how problematic that was. But even if that would be an exception, banning Obama. Now they'd be like, well, Obama did the same thing. No, Obama banned travel from specific countries that specifically endorsed state-sponsored terrorism. And so you couldn't travel from those countries. And Trump started doing that as well. But you can't, you listen to people, you believe them for what they say they are. And Trump campaigned on his end goal of a total, complete ban of Muslims entering this country. That he didn't get to implement the entire thing doesn't mean that we should ignore what he campaigned on, because he was campaigning to those white supremacists, those white nationalists, those people who were in this country who believe in replacement theory, those people who would march down the streets of Charlottesville shouting, "The Jews will not replace us." Those are the people that he was talking to when he said that.
Which was a term I heard frequently.
Lifted and gifted citations, pretty please. Yes, let's do it. Citations, pretty please. It was literally on his campaign website. But we will bring this over here. Trump. Let's see, does my autocomplete say total and complete ban yet? Total. There you go, total complete shutdown. Because I've already searched this before. Because I've made many of videos on this.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
As he says to thunderous applause. Again, people who support Donald Trump have selective amnesia. They forget all of the terrible things he said. And then they'll either say, a lot of them will be like, oh, well, he said that, but he was just joking. Or maybe he wasn't joking, but you didn't understand what he said. Or maybe you didn't understand, but he was indelicate in how he said it. Or maybe he was indelicate. They're always making excuses. But he campaigned specifically on those words. That was in his press release. That was in a press release on DonaldTrump.com. And it's no longer on DonaldTrump.com. After a while, they eventually took down the press release. But for a while, you could go to DonaldTrump.com and see that press release that he was reading from specifically. But yes, he ran on a total, complete shutdown of Muslims entering this country. V-Radio, that wasn't Make America White Again. I mean, he never said Make America White Again, not that I'm aware of. But he did support... those people who would. He was making a call out. He was by campaigning and saying that he was going to do a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering this country until we figure out what's going on. He was pandering to those people who would want to make America white again. Gabriel Angel, he kept his promise. He banned less than 10 Muslim countries for like 5 months. Again, it wasn't a promise that he made. Again, that was part of his campaign platform. There's a difference between a campaign platform and a promise. Like, you could say, I'm going to run and do this. Like, any president can run for office and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z. But unless he has a Congress that will back him up, or back them up, unless there's a Congress that will enact that legislation, or vote or pass that legislation for him to sign it and put it into law, he can't do anything except say, I'm going to promote it. It's like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders ran on, he wanted to have Medicare for all. And he could get to office, and he could become president. But would he pass Medicare for all? Probably not, because he would have needed a Congress that would pass Medicare for all. And would this Congress pass Medicare for all? Would a Congress that would existed in 2016 have passed Medicare for all, even if it was a country that elected Bernie Sanders president? It's highly doubtful. But if the nation would have given Bernie Sanders a Congress that would have passed Medicare for all, then yeah, he would have done it. But if Bernie Sanders didn't get that Congress to pass Medicare for all, you could have then turned around and tell Bernie, well, you said you wanted Medicare for all and you didn't pass it, so therefore you lied. No, because again, it's how our system of government works. Some people who try and claim that people aren't following through on their campaign promises, when those statements and those campaign platform planks rely on actions from Congress to get it done, are really just stating, this is what I would like to do. When I ran for office back in 2004, I made sure to word things. When I go to Congress, I will fight for this. I will fight for this. I will fight for this. I will make these my priorities in trying to get these things done. I didn't say I would promise to get them done, because I knew that in order to get those things passed into law, it would need a lot more help than just me saying them as good ideas. I would need to work with other people to get those things done. But just because other politicians don't do that and maybe simplify their arguments, that doesn't mean that they're lying when they don't get those things done. Because again, they need the help of other people. Now, you could make pledges like, I'm not going to take campaign contributions from like a donor. Obama, one of his lies that Obama said was that he wasn't going to do signing statements, and that was something that didn't rely on anything. But he said, I'm not going to do signing statements. And then he realized he was wrong, that he couldn't do that. And then he had to make signing statements. So he went back. That was an example of him going back on a campaign promise, because that promise didn't require anything other than his actions or inaction to do. So, and I will call people out on my side when they go back on things that they say that they will do when they don't do them. But most things that presidential candidates say rely on Congress to do things. Like, Joe Biden said that he would nominate and appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court. Now, that required lots of things, like somebody stepping down and Congress the Senate confirming his nomination. And he got that done. But if he would said that I'm going to nominate the first African-American woman as a Supreme Court justice, but the Senate said no, and you didn't get a Senate that would confirm the nomination, guess what? It's not his fault. That's the Senate's fault. And that's the fault of the people for not giving him a Senate that would pass or confirm his proposed nominees to the Supreme Court. So, let's see. What happened? My daughter tested positive for COVID. Oh, no. I'm sorry to hear that, Jolie. I have an 8-year-old, or 9 now. He tested positive for COVID during the past semester, and he was jumping all over the walls. It didn't affect him at all. So him being positive for COVID, I mean, he was vaccinated as well, so he wasn't really affected by it at all. But my thoughts are with you, and hopefully she will be good. I don't know where Julie has been around. Shouts out to Julie, Aaron, Demonox, Angie, Cesar, and Chris, the Liberal Dan Radio patrons. Thank you for supporting the show. If you want to support Liberal Dan Radio, you can go to patreon.com/liberaldan or patreon.liberaldan.com, and either way will bring you there, and you can support the show that way. You can also support the show by subscribing to the channel and liking this video. And look, I subscribe to V Radio. I don't agree with everything that V Radio says. Clearly, I'm criticizing some of the things he's saying right now, but I subscribe to his channel because, I think that he might bring up interesting points that I might not agree with, and he brings up points that I could, talk about. And, I'll subscribe to his channel. I'm sure he subscribes to mine.
Being said by leftists, but I've never actually heard it said by any Trump supporters that I know. And again, just a reminder, I did not vote for Donald Trump. When I read this article, something occurred to me, which was that I actually have never seen any parallels between the idea of wanting to stay distinct and not assimilate into a culture as being part of anything to do with MAGA or Trumpsters or whatever. However, I have stumbled on that kind of thought process when I've been reading different documents that were the foundation of critical race theory. Critical race theory literally teaches that the idea of assimilation and integration, which were favored by people like Martin Luther King, would have led to cultural genocide of black people. First of all, I'd like to make a recommendation that if you have not already, you should watch a guide by people like race theory. I've been reading. However, I have stumbled on that kind of thought process when I've been reading different documents that were the foundation of critical race theory. Critical race theory literally teaches that the idea of assimilation and integration, which were favored by people like Martin Luther King, would have led to cultural genocide of black people.
I mean, right here, this is saying that the banning of critical race theory is an act of genocide. So that's not saying that critical race theory says that that integration is genocide. This is saying that banning critical race theory is an act of genocide, but let's continue.
First of all, I'd like to make a recommendation that if you have not already, you should watch A Guide to Critical Race Theory by Ryan Chapman. He does a fantastic job, and his work is extremely well sourced, and all of the quotes that he does for, basically various books on critical race theory, he literally shows you where he got the quotes from, which I'm going to do a little bit of here in a moment. So since frequently I am told by people who are supportive of critical race theory that obviously I don't understand it, or specifically that I've been given misinformation from Fox News, I'm going to do exactly what Ryan Chapman did, and I'm going to pull directly from their documents. Now, before I begin reading this, I need to...
Now, we're going to assume that he's pulling from their documents and everything's taken in context, right? That they're not going to leave out any particular context, right? Okay, let's continue.
Explain what race consciousness is. This is basically literally the doctrine that we need to be hyper aware of race at all times, in all things in society. And that the idea that color blindness, of meaning just to not take race into account, is itself racist. So,
and I talked about that earlier, didn't I? I did talk about that earlier, where the idea used to be that we thought color blindness was the idea, that we wanted to be colorblind, but when we're being colorblind, we're ignoring the problems that are faced by marginalized folk based on race. So as such, you can't be colorblind if you really want to have an examination of how systemic issues are oppressing marginalized communities. So I don't see why pointing out that colorblindness is somehow saying that integration is somehow genocide. But let's continue.
Here that is, directly from their documents. Let's read it. With its explicit embrace of race consciousness, critical race theory aims to re-examine the terms by which race and racism have been negotiated in American consciousness, and to recover and revitalize the radical tradition of race consciousness among African Americans and other peoples of color. In other words, we need to make black people hyper-aware of their blackness again, which is very similar, in my opinion, to remain Klingon.
No,
anyway,
no, being aware of being race conscious and being aware of your race isn't saying remain Klingon. It's saying understand what's going on with your race. It doesn't mean you can't be in communities with other folks of other backgrounds. It doesn't mean you can't join the Federation. It just means when you join the Federation, don't forget your Klingonness. If you want to compare the two. That's
that was discarded when integration, assimilation, and the ideal of colorblindness became the official norms of racial enlightenment.
Lifted and Gifted, how do you feel about cultural appropriation? Maybe I'll get there later. I don't know if V Radio covers that. I think it might be going off topic. I'd be happy to talk about that later. I think there are examples where when you become a melting pot, that sometimes you get mixing of cultures, especially when two families kind of come together and you mix traditions, but and that's okay. And sometimes I think sometimes that's called cultural appropriation when people mix cultures because they're a family that comes from mixed cultures. That might be an example of overly wokeness, but a lot of times in a melting pot, sometimes you're more like a jambalaya where you might have lots of flavors all mixed together, but the individual flavors can still stand by themselves. And there are definitely circumstances where I think people do appropriate other people's cultures in a negative way, take advantage of the work of other people that they do, and or somehow making those things from other cultures bland by taking away the meaning from them, and those can validly be shown as being cultural appropriation. But that's kind of the 330,000 level view of cultural appropriation, and kind of my feelings on where some things I think are fine and some things are clearly bad, but I'm not going to get into the specific details of that. I think that a cultural appropriation can be a form of genocide if you are eliminating that person's culture. If you're watering down that culture so much that's no longer part of it, that you're taking away and you're losing parts of what makes that culture unique and special. So
now again, going back to Star Trek and the Federation, while assimilation is normally associated with the Borg, if your planet and culture wants to join the Federation, then you assimilate into the culture of the Federation, though you are still able to hold on to your own cultural ideals, and you have certain rights to that end. But at the end of the day, you're basically embracing the Federation's culture. That is essentially an American value. And one of the things that I frequently see when reading critical race theory documents is that they associate that instead not as American culture, but as white culture. It's whiteness. American values are white values, according to critical race theory.
Because American values... Oh, I have a kitty joining me. Let's see if the kitty will join me. Come here, kitty. This is Agnes. Say hello to Agnes. Agnes doesn't like anybody in the house except for Henry. See, Agnes is going to go away now. But there you go. There was Agnes. We picked Agnes. We were going to only get 2 cats. We saw Agnes, and we were like, Agnes is too precious. We need a 3rd cat. And Agnes decided that she's going to only like my youngest son, and that's it. So, but there you go. You got to see Agnes, at least a little small bit of Agnes. I don't know if the filter made it come through good or not, but yes, we had a kitty break. So, anyway, let's rewind that a second so I can refresh what I would want to say.
But as white culture, it's whiteness.
Okay, so white culture, if you live in a society where you have, a white supremacist society, and this does not mean where, it's ruled by all white supremacists, but where white ideas remain supreme, where you don't talk about things like the Tulsa Race Massacre in schools, where you don't teach things about, I never heard about redlining, and as another example, until much later in life. There are many examples of structural and marginalization and oppression of black people and other minorities that I never heard about until I was an adult. And it's terrible that that's the case. But we live in a nation that does whitewash our history a lot. And are we better at it? Are we better at it than before? Sure. I'm sure, there are people who maybe in like the early 1900s, 1910s, maybe they didn't learn about Frederick Douglass as much. Maybe they didn't learn about, other people who are black people throughout history who made achievements and advancements like, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Benjamin Banneker, those, black scientists, black mathematicians, astronomers, people who made significant impacts in our society, and who were largely still segregated and punished, and just simply for being black, but they were still making helping us make great advancements to make our country better. But we didn't learn about a lot of them until later on. Now, I mean, I learned about Benjamin Banneker and other such folks in my elementary and middle school, but I mean, well, Benjamin Banneker was somebody from Maryland, so that's one of the reasons why we learned about it. But also, my school was, I think, better than maybe others in teaching a lot of things. But even then, again, we didn't learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre. We didn't learn about redlining. We didn't learn about all the other forms of structural racism and other ways that black people and other persons of color were oppressed in this country. That's what they mean when they're talking about like the whitewashing and white America and white culture, because that's what we learn about in schools. We learn so much about the white folks and not enough about the black folks.
American values are white values, according to critical race theory. And in this quote from another document...
Yes, I did look at a flyer identifying working hard, being on time, using logic and reasoning as white culture. I did look at that. And then, of course, they apologized for that because they realized that they were wrong for saying it. Somebody can say something that's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's a true belief of the majority of the people saying it. You know, there are some times where the quacks get through. Sometimes the quacks get through, and you have to make sure to understand when it's just a quack getting through versus a true legitimate feeling of the organization as a whole, or the group as a whole, or the belief as a whole. Lifted and gifted. I may disagree with you, but you can at least express your opinion clearly and respectfully, and I respect that. Liberal dancer. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And you're not the first person who I disagree with to make that same comment. I think there are, the radio show I listen to in the morning every morning, I think a lot of the people who call in will be like, there'll be other liberal or leftist type folks or progressives who call into the show and who will call in angry and emotional and all that other stuff. That I don't blame people for being angry and emotional. I can sometimes be angry and emotional too, but I do find that trying to bring an argument from a position or a point that's bringing up here's this fact, here's this idea, here's this source, and sometimes even try and source things from like Fox News just to try and make it more palatable for the people I'm trying to make the argument to. But I think a lot of the people who listen to that show have made the comments, I disagree with Liberal Dan, but of all of the liberal callers that call into your show, he's the most, he's the person who's the most reasonable, I guess, of everybody. And maybe that's happened less and less, but I think that's because of our political nature recently. But I think our political culture as a whole has gotten more segregated from left and right, and I think there's a lot more hatred of people on the other side of the aisle. And look, I don't hate V Radio. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but I don't hate him. I think, I think he's definitely an interesting character, interesting fella, because he, comes from such that position of, I voted for Bernie twice. He voted for Bernie in 16 and 20. He was Occupy Wall Street, but he doesn't like woke culture. He doesn't like critical race theory. And it makes me want to think, like, how does somebody get that way? And so I really want to understand people like V Radio. It's compelling. He's compelling to me because I want to understand what makes him think and how he came to think this way. And and I'll watch his stuff and I have no problem openly disagreeing with him, as clearly I do. But I think he makes he's a compelling YouTuber because of the fact that he comes from such an interesting place that you wouldn't necessarily intuitively think would be possible in how our modern political spheres work these days. So it's one of the reasons why V Radio caught my attention. It was during the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and it's one of the reasons why I'm, really, do like looking at his videos, and I've wanted to do more reactions to it, but life gets in the way. So, let's see, Gabriel Archangel, woke culture destroyed and fractured, Occupy. I mean, that's what V Radio said. Are you saying that as well, or are you laughing at that? Let's see. Anyway, back to the video.
Critical race theory and introduction, as I have underlined here, it also considers cultural nationalism and the opposite notion that minorities should attempt to assimilate and blend into mainstream society. In other words...
Right, so chapter 3 takes up storytelling, counter-storytelling, and the narrative turn in general. Chapter 4 addresses the twin themes of intersectionality and anti-essentialism. It also considers cultural nationalism. It considers cultural nationalism and the opposite notion that minorities should attempt to assimilate and blend into mainstream society. It considers that. It doesn't say, I'm not reading something here that says it says that minorities should or shouldn't attempt, or that minorities should not attempt to assimilate and blend into mainstream society. It's considering it. It's having a discussion of that. So, I mean, again, let's watch further to see where he goes with it, but I just wanted to make that point that it's not stating that minorities should not attempt to assimilate. It's saying that it's considering whether or not minorities should attempt to assimilate and blend into mainstream society. So let's continue.
Critical race theory does not support the idea that people of the minority culture should assimilate into American society, which they label white society. So they oppose that idea. Why does that sound like remain Klingon?
I don't see them specifically opposing it in that statement. I'm saying that they're considering it. They're looking at it. And that's honestly that's often a conservative way of thought. And I know you're not a conservative, V-Radio, so I'm not saying you're a conservative, but that's something I've dealt with a lot with conservative-minded folks, is that it's black and white. There's no gray area. If you, by bringing up something, like in sex ed classes, by bringing up condom usage, for example, and showing people like how to use a condom in sex ed, conservatives will say you are now giving them permission to have sex because you've shown them how to use a condom. Well, no, you're just giving them the information. You're having the discussion about how to do it. It doesn't mean that you're saying, yes, do this, yes, have sex, or no, don't have sex. It's not that extreme. So again, they were saying we consider the ideas of whether or not, minorities should assimilate into the cultures. They're not saying minorities shouldn't, at least at this point. And we'll see, again, maybe V-Radio has said in the chat, watch more of the video again. And we'll continue to watch it, but I'm just saying right now is that the point that you made right at that point, V-Radio, was not a point that you could read. You can't read that statement from this. You can't read this and say they're saying that you shouldn't assimilate. You can't read that and come to that conclusion properly. You can read that and say that they're talking about it, they're considering it. They're considering cultural nationalism and the opposite notion that minorities should attempt to assimilate and blend into a mainstream society. They're discussing the two. They're not saying that one is bad or the other at that point in time. So I don't know how you reach that conclusion. So that's what I told you on Twitter, that sometimes I don't know how you reach the certain conclusions that you come to. This is an example of where I don't understand where you got this feeling, how you went from this statement to that conclusion. It seems to be a big illogical leap from one point to the other. Maybe you go on to it and maybe you continue it, but at this point, I don't see where it's logical.
But if you look down here at the bottom, you will notice that they point out that they believe that the ideas of integration and assimilation, meaning the notion that we were going to become a colorblind society and treat everyone that
too much
theory, which is that sound like remain Klingon.
Okay.
Now, this is an excerpt from Race Consciousness, which is a book specifically dedicated to that aspect of critical race theory. I'm not going to read this entire thing, but if you look down here at the bottom, you will notice that they point out that they believe that the ideas of integration and assimilation, meaning the notion that we were going to become a colorblind society and treat everybody equally, was actually a secret ploy on the part of white supremacists to dominate black people.
Okay, so here's the thing. Just because you reject colorblindness, it doesn't mean that you are rejecting treating people equally. That's two completely separate things. This is without reading the entire thing right here. But let's hear Race Consciousness, Gary Peller, the Black Nationalist Critique. Okay, so this is as I'm reading this, to me that says to me that this is a section discussing the Black Nationalist critique of what is being discussed in this book. It's not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with it off the top. I'm not coming into seeing, oh, this person is stating that this is what they believe. This person is reporting on what the black nationalists might believe, and there's a difference there. It's like if I report on something, it doesn't mean that I agree with that something. It just means I'm reporting on that something. Like if I report on slavery, if I write a report on slavery, it doesn't mean I agree with slavery. I'm just telling about slavery. Thus, within the black... So let's read the whole thing and see what it says. Thus, within the black community, there are two separate challenges to the traditional integration policy, which long has constituted the major objective of established Negro leadership. There is the general skepticism that black people, even after having transformed into a, quote, white black man, which, you know, there's the whole thing of, you know, where somebody, you know, like, there were white people who'd be like, oh, you don't act black. You know, the idea that, oh, you act white. You know, the idea that somebody acts black or acts white, you know, that's problematic. But let's see, after you transform yourself into a white black, I mean, I guess there's a typo there because it looks like not an L, but you will enjoy full acceptance in American society, and there is no longer a range of doubt where you should even should complete integration somehow be achieved. It would prove to be really desirable for its price, maybe the total absorption and disappearance of the race, a sort of painless genocide. Understandably, it is the black masses who have the most vociferously articulated these dangers of assimilation. They've watched this with alarm, as the more fortunate among their ranks have gradually risen to the top, only to be promptly integrated off into the white community, absorbed into other white culture, often with undisguised contempt for all that they have previously constituted their racial and cultural heritage. Also, it was the black masses who first perceived that integration actually increases the white community's control of the black one by destroying institutions, by absorbing black leadership, and coinciding its interests with those of the white community. Such injurious, if unintended, side effects of integration have been felt in almost every layer of the black community. Okay, so this is, again, it's not necessarily Gary Peller agreeing with this. It's from just me reading this, it's him reporting about what the black nationalist critique of integration is. That if you're a black nationalist, you believe this. It's not saying that this is what everybody who follows critical race theory believes. This is saying that a black nationalist critique of integrating oneself fully into American society, i.e. white society, and making yourself, you know, lose all of your culture, lose all of your aspects in order to change yourself to fit in with the white folks so that they'll accept you, is going to remove all of those things that made you and your culture unique and what you brought into the table, i.e. I guess to use the melting pot analogy, by fully being absorbed into the melting pot, into what is being cooked into the melting pot, you lose the things that make you distinct. Whereas if you remain a jambalaya, you still have those distinct flavors that will stand out, despite the fact that you're all working together in the same pot. And so that's what I understand from that. But again, it's so maybe that point may be a little bit closer to remain Klingon, in that they're trying to say that you should not lose your inherent blackness. You should not lose what makes you you. You should not change yourself in order to be accepted by others. America should accept you for who you are, and not have you, as some might say, you know, dance around and act as what the current power structure wants you to act. You should be able to act as you wish to act and be accepted for you as you are. So that is one of the points being made there. But again, this is just the critique of integration. This isn't saying that critical race theory believes in this wholly. So that's one of the problems I think I have with your conclusion.
So by trying to make them equal to us.
And V-Radio says this is literally what the Klingon said at the start of the video. But the Klingon at the start of the video was like, you don't want to join the Federation because you want to be an isolationist. This isn't necessarily saying be an isolationist and don't join with anybody. It's just saying if you do whatever it is you do that makes you lose your uniqueness, you are therefore losing what makes you unique. You are losing what your culture is, i.e. joining the Federation. Like the Klingon, it's not Voke, it's the other, I don't remember what the name of the Klingon leader was. Voke was the other Klingon guy who rebelled against that Klingon leader. I think I'm correct on that one. It's been a while since I've seen that episode of Discovery. Discovery's further on. I don't remember that particular character's name, which is bad of me. I'm usually a nerd about that sort of thing. But the way that the Klingons in that series viewed joining the Federation is how the Federation would view joining the Borg. The Klingons were basically saying if you join the Federation, you're going to lose your Klingonness, just like if anybody would joining the Borg. They didn't know the Borg at the time, but still. When in reality, joining the Federation still allows, he could see by saying you have Andorians, you have Vulcans, you have humans, you have all these people in the Federation. They still maintain their inherent nationalities, their inherent planetalities, I guess, if you want to call it, for lack of a better word, their ethnicities, I guess. They still keep those things. They're just part of the Federation is a jambalaya, is a gumbo. It is where you do have everybody working together to make an overall better whole, but you still have the individual parts of people. The Klingon, who is the radical Klingon, is trying to argue that by not joining up with the Federation, by rejecting the Federation claims, you're not going to lose yourself. But that's the argument of a white supremacist. That's the argument of somebody who is a white nationalist, who is against mixing of people in together. It's against inviting everybody in to join in the one big pot, because he doesn't want to. He feels that by doing so you're going to lose yourself. In reality, when you're in doing so, you're going to, you can do so without losing yourself. So I don't necessarily think this is saying you don't separate yourself because you're going to lose. This just says don't take an action where you're going to lose yourself. Don't Borgify yourself. Whereas the Klingons, there's a subtle difference there. And maybe you don't want to see it, but there's a subtle difference there. That's where the Klingon is saying if you join with the Federation, there's no chance that you're not going to lose yourself. Whereas this statement in the race consciousness is saying is like, don't go to the point where you do lose yourself, because then you're going to lose what makes you special. It doesn't necessarily say that being a part of this nation is going to automatically make you lose yourself. There is a difference there. It's subtle.
We were trying to dominate them. Here's another excerpt from that critical race theory document, Race Consciousness. I'm not going to read the entire thing. You can pause it if you want to, but here I have underlined in red, thus, when black nationalists, Klingons, declared that integration was a subterfuge for white supremacy, as in Federation supremacy, and even represented a form of painless genocide. So again, they believe it's genocide, that this is cultural genocide, that we're trying to force them to become white. Now, the Star Trek Federation and American society have this in common, that while they are unified and do have a common culture, that is the Federation culture, as I mentioned earlier, each individual member of the Federation still maintains their own cultural heritage, and nobody's trying to take that from them. Just as there are no laws that are being passed to make it illegal for people of African American descent to honor their own cultures and superstitions and, languages. I mean, there is no effort to try to stamp this out, which is one.
Okay, but there is an effort to try and prevent people from coming in and trying to bland out, I guess, to try and be separatist, to try and be white segregationist, to keep yourself separate, to not let. To not allow the Jews to replace them. But he didn't want to read the whole thing, but let's read the whole thing. Let's look. Nationalism as a critique of universalism. Integrationists, by and large, never comprehended the analysis of racial domination presented by black nationalists from the universalist view of racism as a distortion of an otherwise aracial nationality. Integrationists interpreted the race consciousness of black nationalists as the mark of racism and never considered the nationalist position as a competing alternative and systemic analysis of meaning of racial domination. Thus, when black nationalists declared that integration was a subterfuge for white supremacy, and even represented a form of painless genocide, integrationists literally could not understand what they were talking about. The nationalist worldview was based on a fundamentally different set of beliefs and perceptual categories through which reforms that looked progressive to integrationists looked regressive to nationalists. Again, this is not making the point that CRT believes that you can't integrate, that you can't be a part of this American melting pot, that you should be like the Klingons were telling you to be. This is explaining why the two groups disagree with each other. It's not making a moral statement as to which side is better. At least not in this thing that you quoted. So I think it's a distortion to claim that CRT believes that you shouldn't integrate, because this is showing just a difference between the two sides. Let's continue.
One of the reasons why suggesting that
Let's see. Oh, Where do you draw the line, lifted and gifted, between individual and societal freedoms? The 30,000 view point of view on that would be, are you harming others? Do you risk harming others? If it's a matter of individual freedom, you should have the freedom to do anything you want to do, as long as it doesn't risk harm to other people. As long as you're not choosing to put other people at risk, or undue risk might be a better way to put it. Because technically when we all drive in a car, we're technically putting everybody at risk, because technically you could cause an accident for whatever reason. But we have a set of laws that cover traffic laws to follow, and if we all follow those traffic laws, we hopefully will reduce the amount of risk that each of us has to take, as an example. But for example, like, I've often been critical of the folks who oppose masking and mass vaccinations, social distancing, and vaccine mandates to be able to go certain places, because these people believe that they should have the freedom to not wear a mask, for example. But your right to swing your fist stops well before it hits anybody's face. Like, if I'm swinging, I don't have the right to swing my fist at you at all. It doesn't matter if I hit you or not. I do not have, that's an assault. I don't have the right to swing a fist at you. I don't have the right to, and I know this isn't a good punching motion, but I'm trying to fit it in the camera. So, I don't have the right to swing my fist and threaten you with a punch. It doesn't matter if I hit you or not. I don't have the right to make that threat to you. I don't have the right to threaten harm with you. I don't have the right, I might have the right to own a gun, but I don't have the right to fire the gun in the air randomly, all willy-nilly, because that puts you and other people at risk, because you might get hit by a random flying bullet. Now, people who are extremists when it comes to individual liberty will say, well, your health is not my issue. Such people, to me, sounds like a person who would say, well, I have the right to shoot the gun in the air and fire it all over the place. Doesn't matter. Once the bullets come up, who comes where they come down? That's not my department, says Werner von Braun. To paraphrase Tom Lehrer. Anyway, so again, but as a 30,000 viewpoint, we can go more into this later on the podcast or whatever if you want. I don't want to go too much into that, but individual freedom stop when you put other people at risk. When you start risking, you don't have the right to decide what level of risk I should get to take. There you go. Okay, so let's go back to this part.
Integration into American society was an attempt at cultural genocide is just asinine.
Yes, okay, V-Ray says, the Klingons in the start of the video literally said that the Federation were trying to disturb their purity. And again, and that's what white nationalists want to do, is they believe that by having people come into the country, you want to destroy their purity. I don't think that's what this description of black nationalism, I don't think that's what they're saying. They're not saying that joining up with America is destroying their purity. They're saying that integrationists, i.e. the people who want people to be absorbed fully, are harming, they're losing their I think you have two people who are probably talking over each other and arguing these points. But again, I still don't think that, while there might be some similarities to the arguments made by the Klingon, I don't think it's exactly dead on, and I also think that you're missing the point that this is an author who is showing both points of view in the discussion of race consciousness. It's not, and race consciousness may be part of CRT, but it's not a race these are discussions of part of race consciousness. Race consciousness is part of CRT, but that doesn't necessarily mean that specific underlined point that was underlined, that doesn't mean that that's part of CRT. And that's where I think you might be failing to understand that. So you are reaching like Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. Well, hopefully not I don't want to spoil it.
Now, one of the other things that critical race theory makes a habit of doing is venerating the early work of Malcolm X when he was a segregationist, racist, black nationalist. And it's interesting because when you look pretty closely at that time of Malcolm X's life...
Again, when we're discussing, I guess, level racism, when he would be discussing racism, I'm sure it will also be including the definition where that is the Marxist definition of racism, that racism requires power. And that black people during Malcolm X's time didn't have the power the Klan may have, but Malcolm X and black folk in general don't have the power, and as such, can't in and of itself be racist, or their whatever bigotry he might have held is not necessarily harmful or a threat to white society as a whole.
When he was working for Elijah Muhammad, who was the progenitor of the Nation of Islam, which is...
Yeah, there are some black nationalists who do believe themselves to be the master race, yes, and those cuckoos are out there, but I don't think that's what they're talking about in that last article. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that's what they're talking about in the last article. You know, I don't think, like some black nationalists believe that they're black supremacists. I think there's a difference between black nationalists and black supremacists when it comes to that thing. And you might say, well, Dan, you don't think there's a difference between white nationalists and white supremacists. Ultimately, because it comes from the fact of the power structure, where a black nationalist might want to be like, look, we've dealt with racism too much, and therefore we want to have a black nation, and so to protect ourselves. Whereas a white nationalist is like, we don't want anybody other than white people here because we're protecting our purity. And there's a big difference between the two.
It's just basically a black supremacist group. At one point, Elijah Muhammad asked Malcolm X to meet with, of all people, the Ku Klux Klan. Why? Because they had an awful lot in common with them. The meeting was the beginning of an uneasy alliance between the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan on shared goals of racial segregation and separation. It was also the beginning of Malcolm's disillusionment with the black Muslim organizations and his embrace of a more mainstream civil rights movement.
So you're just sitting here saying that Malcolm X is a black supremacist and a segregationist, and this just says that he's not. That he saw this attempt to do that, and this caused him to reject the black Muslim organization and embrace mainstream civil rights.
In other words, this event was one of the things that led to Malcolm X realizing that segregation, and more specifically black nationalism and black supremacy, was stupid and not the philosophy that he wanted to follow. A fact that the current civil rights activists tend to gloss over, in addition to trying to reinvent Martin Luther King as somehow being supportive of riots. Let's continue.
I mean, Martin Luther King did say that the riot is the voice of the unheard. So there you go.
At the time of the meeting, race relations in America had been rocked by the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling, which had outlawed school segregation. This, I might add, according to Derek Bell, one of the main writers of critical race theory, was supposedly, again, an attempt at white supremacy. Like, they literally believed that desegregating schools...
Okay, so took a while for the mouse to click. He believed at a certain time, and then he saw that it was absurd, and then he changed his mind again. So, you know, people are allowed to be wrong, and they're allowed to change their minds. And, you know, when people do change their minds, ultimately at the end of the day, do we say, oh, but you used to feel this way? No. You then say, okay, well, this person, after seeing everything that was to be seen, he realized that the old way that he believes is wrong and that this is the better way. So then you give them credit for seeing the better way.
Was an attempt to destroy, black culture, to further white supremacy.
Let's see, hold on. Gabriel Archangel, CRT starts with the premise that civil rights movement was a failure to achieve equality. Now, I don't know if that's what they start with, but there is still inequality after the civil rights movement, so it's technically a true statement. We still have systems of oppression. We still have marginalization of people after the civil rights movement because it didn't do enough. And critical race theory wants to look at why we didn't get there, why we didn't get far enough, why we didn't cross that bridge, why we didn't breach that divide. That's what critical race theory, one of the things that critical race theory wants to look at. And it's not necessarily saying, oh, civil rights is bad. It's trying to look at what systems are still in place in this country, in this society, that continues to perpetuate the marginalization and oppression of folks who aren't white in this country.
Elijah Muhammad...
Temple 1219. So somebody wasn't perfectly perfect 60 years ago. This is shocking. Exactly.
Appeared to have other ideas entirely. He struck a note nowhere near as assertive toward the Klan as Malcolm had hoped. Dispassionate as usual when asserting Nation of Islam doctrine, Muhammad stated that his battle was not against whites, but for the lost hearts and minds of black people. Both the Klan and the Nation of Islam, Muhammad summarized, opposed integration and race mixing. Each group was on record as opposing the goals of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., although for separate and unequal reasons. The Muslims viewed King as a chief rival. The Klan saw him as a dangerous threat to white hegemony. Moreover, Muhammad allowed for no hierarchy.
And that kind of explains the difference. Also, I guess between like the black nationalists and like the Klingons, or the black nationalists and the white nationalists, is how they view. Maybe there's some similarities there, like between Elijah Muhammad's group and between the Klan, because they both wanted to be separate, but they wanted to be so for different reasons. One, you know, they again, as they says in the article, the Nation of Islam viewed King as the chief rival, while the Klan saw him as a threat to whiteness.
Among Caucasians on the issue of white supremacy, from the sitting U.S. president to the imperial.
But does the CRT advocates believe that Malcolm X was correct during that time in his life? I mean, you haven't established that in this video or in any other thing that I've seen. You haven't established that point. You're stating that conclusion, but you haven't made the required logical arguments to be able to get there. You haven't laid out that, okay, this proves this, proves this, proves this, and there you go.
Wizard, all
you say you did, but you haven't. You haven't to me. I don't know if anybody else in the chat believes that you did or not. Let's see. Did Aaron have to leave? Oh, Aaron just said be right back. Okay, that's fine. I mean, I don't have to have a moderator at all times, but Jolie's still here, so there you go. Again, I haven't seen from what you said. There's nothing that has convinced me that CRT believes what Malcolm X used to believe. It's just that CRT is trying to, look at race and why we're in the place that we're at.
All were slammed as white devils. Does that sound familiar? Remember, all white people are the same and collectively guilty for everything that has ever happened, or ever perpetrated by anyone who happened to be white. What Elijah Muhammad was reaching out to the Ku Klux Klan about was essentially to get their...
Well, I mean, if you were a black person alive in the 60s, would you trust any white person, really? It would probably take a lot for you to trust any white person because of how white people and white power structures have treated you throughout the ages. And is it wrong to have... If you were an oppressed person, are you then wrong for fearing that the people who have been oppressing you, for fearing those people that they might continue to oppress you? I mean, there's a huge difference between somebody who is oppressed and abused and marginalized, beat by cops, etc. People who were discriminated against, forced into, separate bathrooms, separate eating areas, all of the people that were forced who were punished for being black by white folks. It's not unreasonable for them to be leery of any white person, even if the white person is a good person, even if the white person wants to help them. It would take a lot for that white person to probably prove that they are okay. They're still probably viewed with a little bit of distrust because they're like, well, what if I'm wrong? Whereas on the other side, the people who are doing the discriminating, the people who are doing the racist acts, the people who are looking at black people and saying, oh, well, they're beneath us, they're inferior, and that's why they shouldn't be able to eat at our same counters and eat at the same whatever. That's why we can't allow interracial marriage because it's going to, destroy white purity. That's a completely different perspective than the folks who are oppressed. And that's why that's why in discussions of racism, when you're talking about systemic issues and levels of systemic oppression, that's why you can't look at the people from different groups and treat them as the same way, because they hadn't been treated the same way. Because one group of people had power and the other people did not. And the other people had power stripped from them. It's not the fact that they had power stripped from them. Every time they tried to do something for themselves and lift themselves up by their bootstraps, they had that power stripped from them. Tulsa race riots. Anytime black people trying to achieve wealth, they're punished by people who view that as a threat because they view what's the word I'm looking for? They view wealth, they view success as like a pie, where if people get more pie, then you get less pie, and they want more pie. The white people want more pie. The white people in power want more pie. So that if they want to keep more pie, they want to make sure that the other people can't get any of the pie. When you could just simply bake more pie and let everybody have a big slice of the pie, of the even bigger pie. You don't have to restrict yourself to a small pie. You can make a bigger pie so that everybody can have a bite. I mean, Vera, you say power is relevant to racism, but I'm saying it's not. It's just the individual idea of racism. Like me individually hating somebody, I don't, but somebody individually hating somebody else because they're race is not the same thing. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about systemic issues. We're talking about power structures. We're talking about government authority and how structures help to marginalize groups of people. That's why power is relevant. That's why you have to talk about power in this. It's not about, one person walking down the street going, I hate that N-word. That's not what they're not when they're talking about racism. They're not talking about some schmuck walking down the street in a Klan hood calling people the N-word. They're talking about schmucks in power, schmucks who are in charge of government, who are using government authority to make sure that black people have less say at the voting booth, to make sure that black people have less say, in any aspect of life, that they're more likely to be arrested, to keep white supremacy, to keep the white people as supreme, and to block black people from making any significant gains. That's why power is important, because we're talking about the people in power. You can't ignore power when you're trying to dismantle racist power structures in this country. Thank you, Gypsy Mama. Let's continue.
Support for reparations in the form of basically being allowed to form an ethno-state for black people. That was what he thought was the best solution, and he felt that since the Ku Klux Klan also wanted black people out of the United States, that they had that in common so they could work together. Think very carefully about that. When you consider that now critical race theory wants us to embrace this kind of thinking as the real civil rights movement, to be...
Okay, apparently I'm buffering again. But again, you haven't established that critical race theory wants you to believe that. That's the problem. You haven't established that at all.
Against race mixing, which I've already seen. I'm sure you guys might remember the Judge of Character show where the lady basically went after Childish Gambino for marrying a white woman and not telling anyone. Essentially, when you study the Nation of Islam doctrine pretty closely, it's really obvious that they're black supremacists. And the racial activism just starts to take on more and more of a black supremacist tone all the time. And if they're pushing towards Malcolm X...
Okay, let's see. See, there you go. You're saying I'm arguing in bad faith, but I would think that the people, I guess, in the chat who would agree with me, like your Gypsy Mamas, like the other people in this chat, Aaron and Jolie, Kimchi, and look, I would say, as Hal says in many of his shows, that he likes the fact that people come to watch his videos, and all you're doing is helping the metrics. All you're doing when you come to the video, you're helping the metrics. You're helping me. So by having people who disagree with me come into the chat, I'm more than happy to have you here because you're helping me grow. And I'm trying to grow. I'm doing that grind to 1,000. I want to get to 1,000. That's my first goal, is to get to 1,000. If I get to 1,000 by September, I think at that point I'll have enough to monetize. Now I know V-Radio doesn't monetize because of issues, but I want to get to the point where I can monetize and get to the point where I can have people super chat and stuff like that, all that good fun stuff, where people can throw me out of money. So you literally claim that I took something out of context. I think you did. You did take something out of context. If you go back to the video, I'm not going to rewind, but you can rewind back. Anybody watching now can rewind back to the video a few minutes ago, maybe 15 or 20 minutes ago at this point, and see where I was like, look, V-Radio is saying that this is critical race theory, and I'm saying no. This is an author who's giving two viewpoints and explaining the viewpoints. The author's not condoning, at least in what we saw, any of either of those viewpoints as being correct, and it's not establishing that those viewpoints are part of critical race theory. It's like you're putting these pieces together, but the puzzle pieces don't necessarily fit. You're not making them fit. And that's what I'm saying. I will tell you, and you don't have to believe me, but if you made the point, if you make the point you think you're making, I would agree with you, but you haven't. You haven't made the point that you think you're making. You are using these points because you believe that this is that it supports your end argument, but you haven't. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but if you made the argument you thought you were making, I would be given no choice but to agree with you, because that's the type of person that I am. I'm the type of person who is going to sit there, and if you make, like, we'll bring up another random topic altogether. Rape culture. The idea of rape culture. I didn't used to believe in the idea that rape culture existed. Why? Because in my mind, it wasn't proven to me that it did exist. However, somebody made an argument to me that proved that was like, okay, this is why rape culture exists. This is an example of rape culture. And it was a very logical argument that was made to me, and I had no choice but to change my point of view because I was given an argument that made perfect sense. So therefore, I changed my mind because the person I wasn't so ingrained in my thoughts. I'm never so ingrained in my thoughts and beliefs that I'm never going to change my mind ever. So, but the onus still is on you to change your mind. And you saying that, yes, I did, I proved it, you haven't, and I've in this video I've explained why you haven't. I didn't say that, Gabriel. You said you never address any arguments. You just said you don't care about being right. It doesn't matter what's true as long as it drives traffic. That's not what I said. Again, you can rewind and see that I said I like having people in the chat who disagree with me. I don't mind having people in the chat that disagree with me, partially because it drives traffic. It helps me with my numbers. Yes, it might help me grow to 2,000 subscribers, sure. But it's not that I don't want me to be right. I would, if I sat here and I watched V-Radio's video and he convinced me that I was wrong and that he was right, I would say so. And I would say, look, V-Radio is absolutely correct in this, if that's what I believe, if that's what he made the point. And would it matter to me that other people might disagree with me? Would it matter to me that other people might say, well, that's wrong? Because he would have made a point, he would have made the argument, and I would agree, I would admit to being wrong at that point, because I have. Leslie Shaw, thank you for the other good example. I appreciate that. What was the argument that made me believe in rape culture? I guess is what you're asking, Lucifer. The argument that made me believe in rape culture is the fact that when you have a false accusation of rape, which are rare, but when you have a false accusation of rape, it makes it that much more harder for people who are victims of rape to come forward, because it ingrains this idea into society that people who claim rape are just lying about it. And so when you had like the case, like the Duke Lacrosse rape case, where the prosecutor was completely just going overboard and trying to prove his case because this was the case of his career. He was going to nail these privileged white folks to the wall for raping this black prostitute. And I think she was a prostitute. Maybe she was just a stripper. I don't know. I don't judge on Liberal Dan Radio when it comes to sex work as real work. I think people should be able to do prostitution or whatever. But I think the point is that she claimed that these white boys raped her. And what happened? There was proof that they didn't. There was absolute proof that they didn't. So the case was tossed, and they were found to be, or they were never found guilty of rape. And because of that case, you have people who will then point to the Duke rape case and say, oh, well, if this person lied about rape, then why didn't this other person lie about rape? Or why are all people lying about rape? And that perpetuates to this idea that allows rapists to get away with rape. And if you're perpetuating an idea that ideas that allow rapists to get away with rape, it's rape culture. And here's another way to look at it. If you don't, what is culture? What is a culture? Because I used to reject the idea of rape culture because I was like, we don't cheer rape. We don't yippee yes yay ho rape. That's why I oppose the idea of rape culture. But what is a culture? If you take a throat culture, when you're testing for strep, they swab your throat and they put it into culture. And if you have strep, it's where strep thrives. So it's a strep culture. So seeing if there's strep will thrive there. If there's not strep won't thrive there. So only these diseases will strive in that culture. Same thing with any sort of culture, like with pop culture. It's a system where the popular things thrive. So a rape culture is a place where rape thrives. It doesn't have to be approved of. It doesn't have to be like, legal, but it could still be someplace where rape thrives. And when you do things like doubt women who come forward, doubt victims who come forward, because not just women are raped, there are other people who are raped as well, men, non-binary folks, etc. When you do that, when you make it so that people are less likely to come forward because you treat people who come forward with rape accusations as if they are somehow lying, and somehow they are not to be trusted, when you try and catch them in all these horrible things, like when you ask victims if they enjoyed it. I personally know people who were raped who were asked if they were enjoyed it by the cops. Those sort of things make it much harder for people to want to come forward because they don't want to have to deal with how society deals with victims of rape, and therefore if they're less likely to come forward to talk about the rape, rapists are less likely to get punished, and as such, you allow rape to thrive. And that's why we live in a rape culture. Lifted and gifted to Amber Heard lie, according to the jury that she did. According, I think, I didn't watch the entire story. I didn't watch the entire case, but from what I did see from some of she said, well, I didn't say this, and then she went ahead and they played video of her saying, you think that they're going to believe you over me, or they said all that stuff. Yeah, Amber Heard lied, and Amber Heard purposely lied and defamed Johnny Depp, and that's why the jury found that she defamed him. There you go. Let's see. V Radio says, no rape culture unless you were talking about Jacob Blake getting shot in the back when he was violating a restraining order his rape victim had against him. That somebody would violate a restraining order is not disproof of rape culture. Or like because that happened is if you didn't say, I don't even know where you're. That's why I think your conclusions sometimes are flawed, because that I just don't understand how you even come to that conclusion. Like, there's no rape culture unless you specifically state that Jacob Blake was perpetuating it. We have a system that allows, the system do not allow for restraining orders to have the teeth as you might want them to have, and they're only reactionary type things. There are plenty of rapists who walk free many times because of the fact that we are not, we treat victims, people who come forward, we treat them horribly. And that's rape culture. Let's continue.
As being one of the role models that they should have. Again, they're referring to this time period of Malcolm's life when he believed that it shouldn't, that segregation was the right answer and that anything less was black genocide. So consider again that
Elijah Muhammad may have said this. Anything else is white genocide. But as I said, sometimes the kooks get through. That doesn't mean that critical race theory is white genocide. Because critical race theory, somebody asked me what I think critical race theory is. It's just an examination of what causes people to... An examination of what... I'm trying to see what my cat's doing, and hoping my cat doesn't pull my cable wire out the wall. I'm having a bad potential connection. Hopefully it's maintains as it's okay. It's showing up red on my on my OBS, so hopefully it's not a problem, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm gonna stop being a pain. You too, Rose. I have Rose in here as well. So I have 2 cats with me right now. The third one's never gonna come in, so that's just never gonna happen. She's too skittish. She's afraid of everything, including her own shadow. Anyway, someone asked me what I thought CRT was. It's the examination of why we have such racial injustices and inequities in this culture still. That's the 30,000 level viewpoint of it. It's not, a support that we should